So today with the training, we're going to be showing you what the new home study looks like in WACAP, how to navigate through it, and what the final product will look like once you bring it up in like a PDF document. It definitely looks different than when you're working directly in it. We want to encourage you guys to ask questions, be curious. This is definitely a wonderful time to learn and just take it all in. We're definitely going to be throwing a lot at you today, and then during the 2-day sessions that we're going to get underway next week. Our goal with moving to the new home study is to create better outcomes for our children's families, as well as better work efficiencies for both our internal staff, our regional licensors, and also you guys as our CPA partners. So before we get underway with all the educational stuff, I just wanted to get our minds warmed up. And I was thinking we've got this sunshine coming, and when it gets sunny out, my travel bug, I should say, she kind of wakes up and starts thinking about places to go. And so if you guys could just put in the chat, what is your dream vacation, or a vacation? Maybe it's not your dream vacation, but maybe it's a vacation coming up. I just want to see what everybody has to say this morning. I see some Italy, Switzerland, Miami, New Zealand. Somebody said going to Mars. Okay. Maldives, Italy, exploring Vietnam. All right. Jamaica. Oh, Carlita just got back from Aruba. That sounds wonderful. Spain, back to Alaska. I see some more Norway, Italy, Greece. Okay. Maldives, Cancun. All right. Well, thank you. It was fun seeing everybody's answers. Oh, I see South Africa in there too. And just wanted to thank you for sharing and participating. So we're going to move on to introductions. I am going to ask, so today's presentation is going to be put on by my coworkers, Carl and Addie, and then myself. And so I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So first up, I'm going to pass it to Carl.
Good morning, everyone, and we're happy to have you join us today for this home study training. My name is Carl Wilson. I'm currently a workforce development team training specialist. I'm a former regional licensor. I've worked with many of you that are currently participating in this meeting or this training. So, yep, that's me. I just wanted to say hello, and I look forward to presenting with you today.
Good morning. My name is Addie. I'm a workforce development and training specialist and former home study specialist, and look forward to working with you today, and welcome.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Alicia Azarin. I also am part of the workforce development team, and I'm a training specialist. I have not done regional licensing, but I worked in assessments for 9.5 years prior to coming to this position, which I've been in for almost 2 years. So one thing you'll notice, you may hear us mentioning the name Mike and or Amy. Those are two of our coworkers. Mike Kincaid is going to be who's playing our fabulous music during breaks, and also forwarding our slides for us. And then we also have Amy Aniello joining us, and she's going to be behind the scenes, basically creating a Q&A document. We try to do, frequently asked question documents for all of our trainings. And so she's going to be capturing questions and answers and making sure that we get everything documented as far as any questions that come up for today. We also have joining us people from leadership. And so if we have questions that come up that maybe the three of us are not able to answer specifically in regards to policy or practice or what have you, we may be reaching out and saying, hey, can you help us answer this question? If we're not able to get it answered today, we will make sure that we have um, an answer for you in the near future. And so, due to the length of today's training, we aren't going to do introductions. We look forward to meeting all of you when we come to all of the CPA 2-day trainings this summer. So we look forward to meeting you in the future, is what I will say. So next slide, please. So some of our housekeeping stuff that we wanted to go over with you, as we've mentioned a couple times today, if you could please just make sure you mute your mics. Even if you're not talking, we sometimes get feedback that comes through. So anytime you notice maybe you get back on and your mic is not muted, please just take care of that. Please be present and engaged. Like I mentioned before, we encourage questions and just really, we know this is new material that we're rolling out today, and so we just want you to be curious and ask questions. As mentioned, there will be attachments and resources sent out at the end of the training, so you can look forward to those once we're done here today. Also, as previously mentioned, this training is being recorded. So again, if you know you have coworkers or colleagues that are not able to be here today, you can let them know that if they would like to see this training, that there will be an opportunity for that. With this training and with us trying to capture questions and answers, if you could please, as much as possible, put your questions in the chat, and that way we'll be able to document them and put them into our Q&A document. However, if you prefer to come off mic and just ask a question, that is fine as well. And then lastly, we will be taking a couple breaks today, pretty short, just due to the time that we're together. Next slide, please. So as we do with all of our trainings, we'd like to go over the community agreements. We hope that by going over these on a regular basis, we'll create an environment where everyone feels comfortable learning and asking questions. And so the first community agreement is just listen for understanding, right? Whether it's maybe a question asked by a colleague, maybe it's something that we as the presenters say, just listen for understanding. And if you have a question about something, please ask it. Assume best intentions of everyone here, right? We're all here to learn, and sometimes maybe we have a question that may seem obvious, but it may not. So just assume best intentions with your colleagues. Be open to others. Allow time to share and process. Equity and inclusion. So it is our hope that this will be a brave space for all of you to learn and share your experiences. A brave space encourages dialogue, which can sometimes be harder and a little uncomfortable at times. And so we recognize this material may not bring out some of those difficult conversations, but it certainly can. So if those come up, let's just all be open to them. Please be fully present and attentive. And lastly, as much as we can in a virtual space, please just try to have fun. Again, be curious about what we're sharing with you, and ask questions. So before we continue on, we have a poll that we would like to share with you guys. With this poll, there is no right or wrong answer. And so approximately about a week and a half to 2 weeks ago, process maps were sent out to everybody. And so there was approximately, I believe, 9 of them. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but the question is, how many of you have read the new process maps for walkout? Your answers are, I've read through them thoroughly. I've read through them, but still have questions. I've glanced at them, but have not read them in detail. I haven't even opened them yet. Or lastly, I had no idea there was there was new process maps. So please go ahead and just mark in your answer. Again, there is no right or wrong with this. We just wanted to gauge where the room is at. So the results are in. So 5% of us said, I have read them thoroughly. 7%, I've read them, but still have questions. Then we've got about 48, or about the majority of people. I've glanced at them, but I've not read them in detail, which is more than fine, right? Again, no right or wrong answer here. I haven't even opened them with 11%, and then I had no idea there were new process maps, 29%. So today you will definitely hear us mention it, and then in the 2-day training, process maps will be mentioned, and if there is anybody that needs those resent out, we will gladly make sure that that information is sent out to those that need it or would like it. Okay, we go on. So one of the things that we wanted to mention is over the last 1.5 to 2 years, we acknowledge that you may have heard different names for the assessment, such as the tiered home study, unified homes, tiered home study, maybe even some other name, right? Like there's been several different names thrown out of what the new home study will be. We wanted to mention today that the official name of the home study is simply the home study. But in today's training, and most likely in the 2-day training, you'll hear us refer to it as the new home study for the purpose of training, and to acknowledge that it is a revised assessment. Today's training was created to, again, help you guys understand what the new home study looks like, how to access it and utilize it within the WACAP system. Next slide. So our learning objectives for today are, by the end of this webinar, you will be more familiar with the new home study within WACAP, including having an understanding of the history of the home study, kind of like how we started the home study and how we got to where we are now, become familiar with the sections of the home study, understand what indicators and mitigators or mitigation is or are, know what the home study guide is, how to use it and where to find it, and then be able to navigate the home study within WACAP. Is there any questions so far? Is everybody good? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to pass it on to Carl, and he will take us through our next part.
Thank you, Alicia. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So it's good to see that. I'm glad that Alicia was able to kind of get a count on the polls to kind of see where we were all at, and it appears that 48% of us got a chance to glance at the practice memos that were sent out to everyone, I believe, on May 23rd. So I'm going to briefly talk about one of the memos that was included in that communication, and this is the migration plan. So I believe this is important. I believe that a lot of your regional licensors have already had discussions with you in regards to what the plan is going forward until we are able to transition into WACAP. So as you know, this plan was set in place in preparation for going live with WACAP. And so CPA agencies are set to go live on September 12th. But prior to that, regional licensing is going to go live on July 10th. And so This migration plan is meant to serve as a time period to allow time for data to be transferred from Family to WACAP. So when we talk about this plan, we can kind of perceive it break it down into 5 phases. And so right now we're past the first phase. The first phase started in April and ended on May 12th. And this phase was basically for all CPA agencies to submit any pending applications that they may have had, applications that were pending over 90 days, to their regional licensors to process and complete by May 12th. But now that we're past this date, we're currently in the second phase. So Mike, if you can go into the next slide for us. Okay. So now we're in phase 2, basically, and this started on May 12th. And so now CPAs are expected to submit all renewal applications that are set to expire between June 5th and July 13th. So CPAs are expected to submit these renewal applications to their regional licensors by June 5th. And so all work that you're currently doing during this migration plan, you're going to continue to still process work as normal. So that means continue to submit work, but the emphasis is to get a lot of these renewal applications processed during this phase of phase 2. And this is going to end on July 11th. Let's keep it going. And so regional licensors, you're going to approve any pending licenses, modifications, or amendments, renewals by June 11th for all work submitted during the first phase. So all of that work that was submitted during the first phase that ended on May 12th, you're going to be processing all that work during this period of time right now. So this is going to end on June 11th. So Mike, if you can go to the next slide for us. Okay. So the migration starts on June 12th. So this is actually when the FamLink freeze is going to occur. So during the FamLink freeze, regional licensors are not going to be able to process or append any new applications, as well as they're not going to be able to approve any licenses in FamLink. So during this time is when a lot of the migration or the data is going to be migrated from FamLink to WACAP. But for the meantime, CPAs and regional licensors are both going to continue their current processes for their work. So, but however, regional licensors, you're not going to be pending any applications or approving any licenses in FamLink, but you will still be doing the work. And you're going to be documenting a lot of your work in FamLink during this time. So just because there's a FamLink freeze for regional licensors, this does not mean that it means that provider notes are still active, licensing investigations and all of the above are still active. You're just not going to be processing any applications or approving any licenses during the freeze during that time. So just so you're aware. We can go to the next slide. Okay, Mike, where we at? Okay, so regional licenses are going to go live on June 11th. Yes. And then the migration will end during this time. So during this time, regional licensors, you're going to be processing the backlog of new and renewal applications that you received. We have a question from Alexa. Yes, correct. ICPC and kinship will be approved during the freeze. So thank you for clarifying that, Alexa. So yes, so kinship and ICPCs during the freeze, those are the only applications that will be approved and still operating in FamLink during that time. So thank you for that clarification. So regional licensors, when the migration plan ends, or when the FamLink freeze ends, you're going to be processing the backlog of new and renewal applications that you did receive. You're also going to be approving the pending licenses within FamLink, and you're going to be intaking applications into the appropriate track in WACAP as well during this time. You're going to continue your regular work for maintenance or renewal work, which includes modifications, amendments, and updated home studies. However, you're also going to be uploading any paper files that you did receive during the freeze into their appropriate tracks in WACAP. So during this time leading up until the CPAs go live, you're going to be uploading the paper applications on behalf of the CPA during that time period. And then, Mike, if you could take us to the next slide. Then, come September 12th, CPAs are going to go live. And so CPAs, when you guys go live, all new applications that come in, you're going to be intaking all the families into WACAP. So all the work going forward from September 12th, you're going to complete all the work in WACAP. And so I, again, am going to encourage you to defer to the migration plan that was sent out on May 23rd. And again, if you have not received it, we'll ensure that just follow up with your regional licensor, and they will make sure that you do receive the migration plan. So please defer to this. If you have any questions as we move forward, Kaylina says June 11th is Sunday. So really the freeze starts the 9th as far as business days go. Let me just double check on that.
Freeze. So freeze will be lifted on the 12th. Am I answering the question, Kaylina? Is that what you were asking?
No, she's saying June 11th. The freeze starts.
Right.
So the freeze starts on June 12th. Really?
Right. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. The freeze will start on June 12th, Kaylina. Sorry about that. Yep. And the freeze will start on June 12th and will end on July 10th, which is the date that regional licensing will go live. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. So we can submit June 12th.
So Carl, can I chime in for one second? So, Kaylina and all CPAs, you can continue your work. There is no freeze for your end at all. The freeze is on our end. So you can continue your work as you've been doing, and you can continue to submit paperwork to us. The freeze is on our end, not your end.
Yeah, Kaylina. So you're going to continue the process. So as Alexa stated, the freeze is on our end, meaning that we're just not going to be able to process it in our current system of FamLink. But you, as well as the regional licensing team, are still going to continue doing your daily work as you do now. So the work isn't necessarily going to stop. It's just how we're going about processing it for the meantime. But your work is going to continue. So you're going to continue doing what you're doing now. So any work you're going to continue to submit to your regional licensors. So it's the freeze in terms of how we're going about documenting and processing it within our database. So that way we can migrate our information to our new database, which is WACAP. But it shouldn't affect you in any capacity in that way. So yes, please don't hold on to things. Keep them coming. Thank you, Melanie. Okay. And again, so for both CPAs and regional licensors, this is why I encourage you to take a look at that migration plan when you get a chance. It's going to help answer all your questions. It's broken down, very detailed, specific to give you an indication of exactly how things are going to look. So it says Susan says our process maps and migration plan, the same thing. No, a migration plan is part of the process map, Susan. So Susan, the communication that went out on the 23rd contains several different process maps, right, of how you're going to complete things in the new WACAP system, such as renewals, new licenses, kinship licenses, right? It contained the migration plan and all types of other resources and guides that's meant to help you navigate WACAP as we transition to this new system. And so again, check your emails on the 23rd. I believe that's the specific date it went out. So if you can, when you get a moment, go back in your old emails and see if you're able to find it. And if not, reach out to your regional licensor and request that from them.
Carl, can I add? I'll be making sure to add everything in the resources at the end of the training. So all of this will be sent out again.
And then Susan as well, when we have our in-person trainings, we're also going to provide these process maps in the invite as well. So you'll get a second chance to actually get these resources again. So no worries on that part in case you didn't receive it. Okay, so we're going to move on just for sake of time. And now we're going to talk about the history of the home study. So a lot of you may have been doing this work longer than me. I've been a regional licensor for 3 years. I've been with the department for the past 5 years. So, but for my understanding, the way that home studies were written prior to 2012, it was a lot more complicated. From what I understand, home studies were somewhat divided. So for those of you who have been writing home studies prior to 2012, you know that the home study has evolved over the years. And prior to 2012, for an example, an unlicensed relative home study or a licensed foster home study or an adoption home study were all completed separately. So for an example, if a relative caregiver that was unlicensed wanted to become licensed, they had to go through an entire home study process again after getting their home study written to be a relative caregiver, but they had to get another one written just to become licensed. And then if they wanted to adopt, it would get passed to the adoption unit and then another home study and more paperwork, right? So it was just a complicated process prior to 2012, which then it evolved and it brought us to the unified home study after 2012, which is when during my experience, this is what I have generally reviewed. Greg, it says it started in Oregon State that in 2001. Okay, so are we late, Greg, in Washington State? So they've been doing this in 2001 in Oregon. Okay, so but in 2012, we had the unified home study, which was meant to make things easier, in which it included the permanency concept for adoptions. This is when LD kind of took over as well, in which we did most of the work. We completed all the home studies, and it wasn't just being passed around to different units. However, even with the unified home study, we still found that there were some challenges, right? So, for example, some families, what if they didn't want to adopt, right? Some families may not have felt comfortable answering all the permanency questions and things of that nature too. So also, as we move to the new home study, it makes things a lot more equitable, and it's more kinship caregiver focused as well as more child focused. So instead of focusing more on the family, its intent is to focus more on how the family can support the child. But we're going to keep it going to the next slide. So as we talked about, the new home study is meant to create more of an equitable assessment, utilizing Res-J concepts as well, shifting the approach to child-centered. And I believe we started doing that earlier on as well too. So a lot of the home studies, a lot of the work you're doing now, you're already shifting your approach to more of a child-centered approach. So also, there's been an emphasis on culture. So if you could recall even now during our review, there is a huge emphasis on culture, and we do check in terms of how a family is going to be able to support a child's culture, whether that be religion, their gender identity expression, cultural concepts, just anything. So we're going to keep it going to the next slide, Mike. So why the change and why now? So over the years, DCYF has worked at improving the home study process to make the pathway to licensure more smooth and painless as possible for all caregivers. In 2019, the department held focus groups regarding the home study process and the home study guide. And in light of all the changes concerning the WAC changes that also address the LGBTQ and affirming and supporting LGBTQ youth and respecting a child's religion and ethnicity, there have been significant court decisions that require DCYF as a whole to change how we work with our relative families. So a lot of the changes now are meant to help support our kinship caregivers in our attempt to license more kinship caregivers and relatives, as well as support a child's culture. So let's keep it going, Mike, to the next slide. Home study terminology. So a lot of this transition that we're doing in WACAP as we're moving from family to WACAP, also with this introduction of the new home study framework that we're adopting now, you're going to see a lot of our terminology change. In some sense, we're going to kind of have to get used to the new terms that we're going to be hearing a lot more. So one of the terms is indicators. So when you all finally do get a chance to get into WACAP and explore around, you're going to see this term indicators being used a lot. And we're going to talk about indicators as well as mitigation later on in today's training. But indicators, get very familiar with that term. An indicator, we're going to talk about it like I said, but it's meant to serve as an area that indicates more information may be needed, right? So when you're writing your narrative and things like that, you'll notice that this indicator pops up, meaning does this indicate that more information needs to be added or discussed for us to have a proper assessment? And then mitigation. So if there is something that's indicated, is this indicator something that needs to be mitigated? Is this an indicator of something that promotes resiliency, or is this an indicator something that's going to indicate potential concern that we need to mitigate? So mitigation is another term that you're going to hear a lot often when you are going through utilizing the new WACAP system with the home study. HAM, it says the new home study also promotes equity and reduces subjectivity. That is correct, Pam. So with indicators and mitigation, this is meant to help provide more of an equitable assessment and approach. So it's going to kind of help guide us to have more of an equitable assessment when we are doing our work, because we're going to be answering and addressing questions the same across the board, right? And by way of that, it does create a more equitable environment and assessment when we are completing these home studies. Limitations and trauma. So you'll see trauma and limitations are going to be part of that framework of indicators and mitigations and things that we're trying to mitigate and things that we're going to be exploring. And assessed, you're going to see the word assessed utilized all throughout the home study. If you could recall prior, we would often just depend on or defer to the applicant's word, right? A lot of times you would see home studies that would reflect what the applicant said. The applicant said A, B, C, and D, right? But now we're moving more towards that approach of where, although the applicant has said A, B, C, and D, right, it's more of an in-depth assessment now. Us as licensors, even though we are doing the work now, but we're utilizing the language and the terms now to clarify and demonstrate that we have verified and that we have assessed what it is that the applicant has reported to us. And so it's forcing us to go more in depth with our assessment, which is a good thing, right? So those are just 4 terms that you're going to hear, or 5 terms that we just included now, but you're going to hear a lot more terms. And thank you, Carlita. Or she sent me a direct message. Sorry. Let's keep it going, Mike, to the next slide. So where are we now? As we wrap up this section, we want to provide a quick recap of what we went over in this section. So we're launching WACAP in July and September. Regional licensing will go live first on July 10th. During this time, regional licensors, leading all the way up until September, before CPAs go live, regional licensors are going to be processing the backlog of all the applications that they receive. So although the work is continuing, the work is not stopping during the migration. We're continuing the work. But regional licensing, you're going to be going into WACAP. You're going to be processing the backlog of the stuff during the freeze, leading all the way up until September. So that gives you time to complete that work. But then come September, CPAs, we're all going to be utilizing the new WACAP system. So that is what we are expecting going forward. And as we prepare prepare for this launch, the workforce development team, as well as the WACAP team, has teamed up, and we're going to be leading trainings to all CPA agencies, leading all the way up until we go live. So during this next 3 months, I believe we're going to be having in-person trainings for 6 CPA cohorts all across the state. And we're going to give you a much more in-depth presentation in terms of WACAP, so that way you'll be familiar. We could hopefully help reduce some of the anxiety. Hopefully that'll give you all time to get familiar with the process maps. And the goal is to be able to get so familiar with the new processes that you will no longer need the process maps, right? And so just to say that with in mind, I know things continue to change, but continue to defer to the communication that gets sent out while we're going through this transition. So with that being said, Tani, when time allows, please forward process maps. Yes, Tani. And so we are, just FYI, we are capturing all of the questions that are coming into the chat. And so we will definitely follow up with you all in regards to any messages that you guys leave in the chat.
May I just chime in for clarification? Yes. Just want to make it crystal clear to CPAs. So during the time frame of June 12th through July 10th, you can continue to do your work, but just know that while you can submit new application again, because on our side, we have that family freeze and backgrounds and applications are need to be processed. There'll be a hold. So we have to be backlogging. So just clarifying that while you can submit your application, you may want to hold off. And I'm not saying you can't. You can continue to submit your application. Just know that for new application, the background cannot be processed during that family freeze for the new ones. So you can hold on your application. If you want to continue to submit, that's fine. But after July 10th, we have to go back and backlog them. So just want to make that clear. So you can continue you shouldn't let that stop your workflow. But yeah, we won't be able to approve any new license again other than kinship and ICPC during that freeze.
So CPAs, so during this freeze period, you could continue your work, right? If you decide you want to submit applications to be processed, regional licensors will accept and complete the work on their end. However, whatever's going to be easier for you to track, right? Because if you're submitting work and you're still tracking it on your end, if this is going to interfere or complicate things for your tracking when you're tracking your own applications, then yes, you could potentially hold off before submitting to regional licensing if that's going to help you out as well. So but during that time, even though you're holding, that does not mean that you have to stop your work. You can still complete all the paperwork and complete your assessments of everything that you need to do and then submit it to regional licensing when the freeze ends, if that's going to make things easier for you. But we are not encouraging you to do either, or we're just saying, hey, it's whatever you decide to do, what's going to be easier for you, but the work isn't going to stop. So John Paul says, when does the timeline start for any new applications or renewal applications submitted during the freeze? When does the timeline start in terms of the 90-day timeline? So everything submitted after June 9th won't be processed until after the freeze. So just in our database, right? So the work is going to continue to stop. We are RN. The work will be processed for regional licensing and CPAs, except we're just not going to be able to document it on RN within our database system. But that does not mean regional licensors are not going to continue to assess and review application packets and things of that nature, right? They're still going to document their work and provider notes and keep a record of everything that they need to backlog to go back to enter into our database. But the work isn't going to stop, Kaylina. So yes, everything submitted after June 9th will be processed, right? So it's still going to be processed if you submit it. It just won't be reflected in our database system, if that makes any sense for you.
But for their intents and purposes, it could not be approved. I think that's the question that needs to be clarified. If you send it to me, yes, I will review it, but I cannot approve it in our system or approve it for you.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, so the question is, so I have, licenses that are almost at the finish line, right? I'm trying to push them in by June 9th, so they will be processed right away and not sit there during the freeze. Because I have families that have been waiting for quite some time, so I'm trying to push them through before the freeze. So I'm just trying to get a clear answer on what day these licenses need to be submitted so they aren't sitting there during the freeze.
So, Kaylina, if I may, because we need time on our end, your regional licensor and the regional licensing student need time to review. So if you're submitting, and I'm not looking at the calendar, let's say the 9th is Friday and freeze starts on Monday, let's say, then they're not gonna have enough time. So I urge you to submit before the 9th. Again, I'm not looking at the calendar, but if you submit something on Friday and freeze starts on Monday, they're not gonna have time to review. So you want to send earlier,
right? And then
as possible.
What about, okay, so I have a transfer that is their license actually expires next month. So that's why I'm trying to get them pushed through.
Transfer meaning like state to you or state to you. Okay. So, maybe we should have offline conversation, case by case. There's always going to be outliers and case by case situations.
So I think a lot of those situations, case by cases, you're probably going to have a few of those pop up during this time, during this migration. So case by case, I encourage you to reach out to your regional licensors and have a discussion with them about how to best proceed as we navigate this migration. So thank you for that. But just to keep with time, I'm going to pass this on. We're going to move on to the next slide, and I'm going to pass this to Addie, and she's going to talk about the home study and what is different and what is the same. So thank you.
Well, good morning again, y'all. We want you to do an activity first. So, and then we'll start looking at the home study or talking about it. You'll look at the home study first. So we're going to put the template of the home study in the chat, and we'd like you to go through it, keeping in mind things that you think are different from the unified home study, and then also what things might be the same as a unified home study. We'll give you 5 minutes to do this, and then we'll come back together and we'll discuss what y'all have found. So if you could get that template in the chat. Okay, templates in the chat.
While you guys are reviewing this, you guys can kind of see the different sections. They're almost, they're not too much different from our current home studies, right? That were in terms of like, you'll just notice different words, right? Behavior management as opposed to discipline. You'll notice resources as opposed to the support system section, right? So you'll notice all these, but they're virtually it's the same information is going to be there. You'll just notice slight terminology differences and things like that, but it's not too much different than what we're already doing. So.
Okay, I know we're a little bit behind, so we're gonna come back, and you can continue to scroll through while we talk. But the first thing I want to do is to ask what you all noticed. Okay, so let's see. I know this is the output of what we're putting in, but will there be prompts for some of these questions? Yes, so just stay tuned, Jessica. So what did y'all think? What did you notice is same or different? You can either put your quote in the chat, or you can come off of mute and talk.
I feel like things are more organized. I feel like it makes, I like how it's laid out. It will be easier once we have the prompts, but I do like how it's laid out.
Yeah, thanks, Helena. Okay, so let's see, similar to the safe home study model. Okay, thanks, Carlita. I'm able to just fill in the blanks. Same themes as yes, the themes are very similar to the unified home study. There will be different tracks, and we'll talk about that again later. We won't necessarily have somebody won't be necessarily doing the unified for adoption or permanency, but we do have those sections available for those who will be. Yes, concepts are similar. What's different? Anybody have some ideas of what's different? More specific detail listed out that is needed. Yes. Okay. Yeah, new language descriptors are different. The separated trauma section, document or verified support first. Yeah, trauma is definitely different. Core concepts of adoption are conversations rather than written narrative for sure. Yeah, so somebody noticed the household members are listed first. So definitely some different arrangement of some of the questions that you, from how it's actually filled out in WCAP to how it prints. Yeah, so we're assessing for child safety and less about being nosy. Yes, that's kind of that's when Pam mentioned the being less subjective. That's sort of, one of the points of this new home study is to be less subjective. So we are focusing on child safety. Expectation of child, yes, the child development stages is definitely different. And again, you'll be able to look at and we'll talk about those different sections and how you might fill those out. We will also be showing you a guide later. So if you have questions about how you answer or interview applicants to get your assessment completed. Okay, so thank you. I appreciate everyone's comments and providing answers. Let's see, a couple more here. Yeah, trauma would be equivalent to abuse history section in the old home study framework. Yes. And sorry, Kat. Okay, so you can see by looking at the home study template, there are a lot of changes, several changes. One of those being the amount of sections you complete. So you'll notice that there are quite a few sections here. Maybe there weren't as many before. So the unified home study has 14, which can amount to, I don't know, 10 or more pages. The new home study now is 26. That sounds like a lot, but keep in mind that the additional sections come from giving applicant A and applicant B individual sections. So if you have a single parent household or a single adult applicant, you may not have as many sections. You have a little bit less work to complete. When you add a second applicant, second adult in the house who will be caring for a child, then you start to add the extra sections. So there's some things that we will there's some sections that will ask you to answer separately for each applicant, and some that will ask you to combine answers for and information, your assessment for each applicant. Oh, I'm seeing a current unstable relationships. Yeah, so relationships is slightly different as well. So we'll start to look at that. Okay, so within WCAP, the home study document that workers will be putting information is found in the documents tile. So when we get into WCAP and show you that, we'll show you where the documents tile is. And that the home study document that we're talking about is just the one that you've seen the template. So DCYF 10-043. In addition to the home study, all applicant and agency forms will be located in the documents tile inside WCAP. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into what the home study will look like in WCAP. And we ask that while we are going through these sections that you don't follow through on your computer, don't follow along. Two reasons for this. First, this is a short training, and we want to be able to get through all parts of the home study. Second, you during your 2-day training, in-person training, there will be demos and time set aside for you to actually go into WCAP and explore as we teach. So you'll get a lot of that to come. Today, we just want to give you overviews of this information. So here we go. Okay. So this is what the home study will look like when you first open it up. So workers will complete all sections of the home study. As you can see on the left-hand side of the first box, these are the different sections of the home study. So of course, you're going to notice that it looks slightly different from the template that will print out at the end of the home study when you're totally finished and you go to approve that home study. What you can download and print will be slightly different from the sections here. The applicant's demographic information populates into the home study from the application form. So as before, applicants will fill out application materials, but they're going to be filling those out electronically. And so a lot of that information will populate into the home study. Information from both the applicant medical self-report form, which is different from from what you're used to having applicants fill out now. The personal information form will also populate over. It's important to note, though, that even though this information populates into WACAP, it's for your information only and will help you in your assessment. It won't print as part of the final home study document. So you're going to actually have to type into the narrative boxes that that will populate into the home study when you finish it. The information that populates from those application forms will inform your assessment and help you through that next step and writing out your information. Let's see, it's your responsibility as a home study writer to check each of your applicant's materials, and then also check how it uploaded into the home study in WACAP, making sure that it transferred over correctly. And if you have questions, you're going to be asking your applicants when you do your interviews. You'll notice that there is a checkbox on each section that states, and you can see this towards the bottom here, check the box below when this page has been completed in full. And so if you notice the red asterisk next to that statement, you have to check the box in order to finalize your home study. Now you can move forward and do additional work in other sections before you've completed this section or checked this box, but you won't be able to finalize the home study. This function is an important function to help you track your progress of the home study. So you'll notice on this right box, the right-hand box here, you'll see this, the address is highlighted right now under household demographics, and that box is green and it has a check mark. That means that it's completed and that the page is complete box has been checked. You are able to skip around, like I said before, before you finalize the home study. You could even check this box and go back and make corrections later, but you won't be able to finalize the home study until everything is checked. This box is checked for every page. One thing we want to point out to everyone is the documentation of progress as it pertains to each section of the home study document. So as you can see here on the left-hand side in the list of sections, you'll see the red arrow is pointing to background and family of origin applicant A and part 1. And you'll notice that there is a pie chart here with part of it is blue and part is white. The white part is not finished, the blue is finished. So this one is not done. And if you scroll to the bottom, if we were able to scroll to the bottom, if we were actually in the WACAP home study, you would notice that the check mark box is not checked to say that it is complete. You'll also notice here, another thing that will give you a clue that this is not done are the 2 blue boxes at the top of the page under where it says part 1. Progress is saved. Looks like you left some questions unanswered. So it's going to look like that until you've finished your page or the section, and before you've checked that box. So this is a great tool for you as you are doing a home study. Typically, you're going to enter information into the narrative boxes and your radio buttons several times. You'll probably come back and forth to this multiple times. So, and you won't go and finalize the home study until everything is fully complete, until probably your regional licensor has reviewed your work and you're ready to finalize it and push it forward. So that is I highly recommend using that as a tool. One way that I have done it, because I've actually done the home study here in WACAP as part of the first migration in assessment as a home study worker, and I would not check that box until I was ready to go. So I would, before I was ready to finalize it, I thought my home study was completed. I would then go through every section, every page, and make sure that then I would check those boxes. There are times when, of course, I've had to go back and maybe change a word or two even after I've checked the box. And you can certainly do that. But it would be good for you, to get used to using this as a tool to help you understand where your pages are not complete. So, okay, let's see. Now, this part of the home study, so trauma, we're looking at trauma. In the trauma section, there are 2 parts that you will need to cover. So part 1 is discussing childhood trauma. And this will repeat for both applicants. So if you have a 2-applicant household, you will be completing a separate one of these, a separate section for each applicant A and applicant B. Addresses childhood trauma, systemic trauma, and any intergenerational trauma that your applicants have experienced. And so this is slightly new, not slightly, it is new. We were talking about trauma before, but in different ways, Carl had pointed out earlier. So you'll notice the red arrow pointing here to this only include narrative significant to the assessment statement right here on this left box, the one under part 1. From the time that we created today's training materials and from today's actual live training, the instructions for the narrative box have changed. So, Melanie, let's see. So how are people working around the issue if they have 3 or more applicants?
I think that's a case by case right there that we would encourage CPAs, if they have 3 applicants, follow up with regional licensing, and then let regional licensing work that out, because I don't think we're able to answer that question right now within WACAP in terms of how the database is set up right now. But that was a question that did come up, Melanie, and I don't think we've yet addressed that. So that's to be determined. That makes sense. But
I think one way you could address it is we've got the 2 applicants specific, but we also will have to indicate other adults in the home. So that could be another option. But I'm not sure if the actual system itself of WACAP is able to have 3 specific applicants. I don't know yet. That will have to be something to pose to the WACAP team. Thanks, Melanie. Okay, so you'll see the statement here again. Only include narrative significant to the assessment. It now says include narrative significant to the assessment. For instance, let's say you have an applicant that you choose the no concerns radio button for, but when you first started working with this applicant and completing your assessment, you may have had some concern. So we want to include that information in the narrative box to show how you came to your decision to say that there are no concerns. It's like showing your work on a math problem. So you want to show how you arrived at that answer. You do not need to fill these out if there is no significant additional information. So this is probably going to be one of those areas which is going to be challenging at first because you're not used to doing this, but it's really you really do not include this information if it's not significant to your assessment. We're also used to writing home studies and putting everything that we have learned about a family, but this is where we're getting rid of the subjectivity, is to only include narrative that's significant for this assessment for this family's license. Okay, so we're going to go into the home study guide more later in the training, but we wanted to point this link out to you just in case you are unsure of what to ask or document for the home study. So if you see the second box on the right, you will see this guide link in blue next to the red arrow. So each page in this home study has a link to the guide. So we have a home study guide to help you understand the section, understand what we should be asking our applicants, and then there are some questions as well. So there are some suggested questions on how to ask, interview your applicants so that you capture that information for your assessment. Let's see, I don't have my chat box open. No, you do not need to put there are no other statements. You only include information that is significant to the assessment. So you have no information that's significant. If you don't think there's anything that is worth putting down and knowing, then you don't put anything in it. So you just leave it blank. And it's not going to, again, you'll see how it prints out, but it'll be different from what you see here in this web-based version of the home study. So.
And we're going to talk about this in more detail when we have indicators and mitigation later on in today's training. So I'll go into more depth in terms of how we're utilizing these narrative boxes and what kind of information to put in and what information to leave that's not necessary to add. So, But Pam, you were going to say something?
I was going to answer the question about generational trauma. So it's the same way we're having a conversation today about generational trauma. We're not using that term with the family, but we're unpacking what that means with the family as part of our interview process. So we're not using clinical terms when we talk to families later in this new home study, the same way we're doing this conversation the same way we do it today. We talk about what that means, what they've experienced, how they've overcome things, the things that the families have learned and focusing on their strengths and how they've overcome things that have happened. So it's the same conversation, it's just worded differently. And we're definitely not using social work terms with families. So it's the same. So hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, so if you're assessing trauma, you're having that conversation with your applicant, and they do disclose, trauma, then you'll be talking about, that experience and maybe history of that trauma. You might be asking about additional family members, or they might, tell you about something that would, to you would, I guess, be an intergenerational trauma. But if you have questions about that, again, you're going to go to that guide, and it's going to describe to you what that is, and then give you some suggestions on how to get to that answer when you're interviewing your applicants. So families may not, of course, as Pam described, understand what intergenerational trauma is or what it means, what that term means. So we aren't going to use those terms with them, but you're going to do the regular assessment and interview that you've been doing all along. Let's see, the home study guide helps you navigate through sections you may not know how to document by providing examples of those questions to ask or explaining the intent of the specific section. Let's see. Okay, so on this slide, we have part 2 of the trauma section here. So this part is asking about adult trauma. The last section, last page that we saw on part 1 was about childhood trauma. So now we're to adult trauma. This the example that we have here that we've created, we have indicated some adult trauma. It was assessed that the applicant experienced trauma as an adult. So once we select that radio button here, you're going to get this list of identifiers. Let's see, indicators, and here it says identified areas of trauma include. So these are indicators. So this box will pop up, and you will have to talk about, or you'll check which type of trauma your applicant has experienced. And again, you're not going to go through this list and ask them whether they've experienced any of these things. It's within your assessment and your interview that you will be, discovering or learning about trauma that they've had. So you're going to have those normal conversations that you've been having, but then you will be this is for your information, and you come in here and you mark what that trauma is. These will not print out on the home study, like separately, each thing that you will not see the checkbox for these sections or for these indicators. But once you do have an indicator that you are, that you mark, you will have another area down below to discuss mitigation. And so these are new terms for the home study, but indicators and mitigations. So you will see, let's see, you'll be asked to select the mitigation factors. You'll see here on the second box, the mitigation factors, select all mitigation factors that apply. So you're going to go through with our example here again. We chose that applicant has demonstrated an ability to protect. This applicant has a child. We will see this later in the home study when we talk about it more in depth. But this applicant we've created has a child. We've figured out that she's demonstrated an ability to protect children, that her trauma has not caused concern or surrounding that. Applicant has attended counseling or therapy related to this. Applicant identified as support system. So these are the mitigation factors. And then below there's a narrative box that you will describe the circumstances of the trauma based off of your interview. If the applicant came or continues to overcome the trauma, you will talk about any concerns, situation behaviors that trigger trauma response. So this is your place to talk about the concerns. Also in this section, you will find specific questions about domestic violence, and we'll show you these when we do the live walkthrough of the home study. Okay, so moving on to caregiver health and well-being. This section addresses the applicant's medical or health concerns, as it would have before, and any mental health diagnoses they may have, and current or historical drug and alcohol use. So these are the different parts that, so you'll see part 1 here refers to let's see, one of the new home study changes, is that you will notice that the section, in addition to the applicant, is an addition of the applicant medical self-report. So this is brand new. Most applicants will be filling out the self-report versus the, well, they'll all have to fill that report out. The doctor completed report is one that will be part of the adoption question, or requirements for permanency. So if an applicant is coming just to be a foster parent and they want to be licensed, they want to care for kids, but they don't want to adopt anyone, or that's, they have decided that they don't want to do that, then they would only have to fill out this medical self-report. Now, as an assessor, you have the ability to ask for a report that is, the confidential report filled out by the doctor. If you find that there's some concern of health or mental health, there's also a mental health form that can be filled out by a mental health provider. If you indicate any concern when you're doing your interviews or reviewing of documents. Let's see, it's again no longer required for them to have the doctor fill out the report. Again, unless the requirements, the adoption requirements for permanency are indicated. You want to make sure that during your interviews that you are discussing the applicant's medical history in detail. And if you have questions or concerns, you can consult the home study guide. Yeah, so Alexa's saying the narrative is not just about plugging what the applicant stated, but assessing and explaining how the home study writer reached the conclusion to choose which radio button. Yeah, thanks, Alexa. Again, but that's where we get to those boxes, the narrative boxes that you will see include narrative that is significant to the assessment. If we decide that there isn't anything significant to the assessment, then we don't need to include narrative. So, okay, so let's see. The section's broken down into 3 parts, as I mentioned. The first part is the medical health conditions. You will complete parts 2 and 3 the same way as part 1. Part 2 is in regards to current or historical mental health, and part 3 is in regards to the historical or current alcohol and or drug use. For the purpose of this training, we selected the applicant has a medical condition that will not affect their daily functioning or care of children. So again, we're assessing their ability to care for children. And so when you think about concerns for any of these topics, it's really in light of, can they care for a child? Does this concern preclude them or keep them from caring for a child in a safe manner? So again, in the narrative box, a brief description of the applicant's medical condition was documented for our applicant here. Melissa is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Her A1C and medical condition is well managed. There are no concerns with her current medical condition. So because she has a health concern, we put it into the narrative box, but there are no actual concerns that it would keep her from providing safety and good care to a child. So, so that's what we did for this page. We do have it marked as being complete. So you see here your green circle with the check for part 1. Actually, all parts are completed. And let's go to the next slide.
One thing with this home study, you'll notice that trauma is at the very beginning of the home study, right? And sometimes when we're forming relationships with our families, jumping right into trauma and having those conversations may be a little difficult, especially if a relationship hasn't been established yet. And so that is one of the good things with this home study. Addie mentioned it while she was speaking, where this home study allows you to jump around from section to section. And so if it's one of those things where it makes sense to maybe work in other sections and come back to trauma, so that when you're having those difficult conversations, if you know, trauma history is something that your family is dealing with, you know, at least you have that relationship established, so those difficult conversations can go a little bit smoother. So we're going to go ahead and continue on. And so the next part that we want to show you is historical intimate partner and supportive relationships. And so this section does have two parts to it, and it will need to be completed for both applicant A and B. You'll notice on the left-hand side, ours only says applicant A. We chose to do a simplistic home study for the demonstration, but any of the sections that require separate interviews or separate assessment for both applicants, it'll say, so for example, under trauma or even under historical intimate partner and supportive relationships, it'll have applicant A, and right below applicant A, it will also have applicant B. And so you want to make sure that you're in the correct section when you're talking to each specific person, but then also that you are filling out both sections. And as Addie mentioned, if you don't complete each section, you won't be able to move forward or finalize the completed home study. And so in this section, what you will see is, so part one, it assesses historical, legal, or intimate relationships. You want to make sure that you're including names of prior partners, dates of the relationship, any legal dates, like if there's a civil, a domestic partnership, marriage, etc. And then again, any narrative that is significant to the assessment. Is this somebody that maybe they were married to and they're still best friends, and this, is somebody that, they still have regular contact with, etc. We can move on to the next section. And so then in part two, we want to assess any historical unstable relationships and any current supportive relationships, right? So we know that some people may have relationships that maybe aren't the best, or, just could cause issue. And so we just want to make sure that we are assessing for that. If people do have unstable relationships, are they able to continue to care for children, keep children safe, etc. And so, just if that comes up for you, it will ask you, excuse me, as I'm trying to get this. So you'll notice on the screen, this is where we talk about assessed. And so it'll say like historical unstable relationships. So we chose that it was assessed that our person did not have an unstable relationship. If you were to select the second radial button that said that they have been, this narrative box becomes required, and it will have a little red asterisk on it asking you to include narrative on what that relationship looked like, where it is now, how it's been mitigated, etc. The second part of this is supportive relationships. And so one thing that we want to make sure that we clarify is under supportive relationships, this is where you want to be documenting if it's assessed that the applicant has supportive relationships. We want to make sure that you are saying who the people are, and then what kind of support do they provide? Do they provide social support, or emotional, financial, just how do they, support the applicant or applicants? Again, if it was assessed that the applicant does not have supportive relationships, how do they take care of themselves? When they're having a rough day or, a rough time of it, how do they take care of themselves so that they can in turn then care for children and make sure that they're providing a safe and stable home? We will be mentioning later on, there's a section called resources. In the resources section, this is where we want to be making mention of people who may act as in more of a parenting role. So, you may be mentioning those people in this section, but in the resources section, this is where we want to say, hey, you know, they have parents that help with overnights, or you know, the child or children go to daycare or after school care, or etc. And so resources is where you would want to add that additional information. Okay, so current relationships. This is a section that is going to be filled out for just one time, and it's for both applicants. And so you'll notice in this section that there are, 3 parts. And so the first part is asking you to document any current marriages, civil unions, domestic partnerships, or intimate relationships that the applicant or applicants have. You want to document any significant information about this relationship. If you're working with a single applicant, you want to make sure you document definitely like how the applicant would handle starting a relationship if they have children placed in the home, right? Or children that are in out of home care placed in the home. And just how they would make that work, and just really make sure that we document that. Go to the next slide. For the second part, this is where we want to be talking about how our applicant or applicants handle differences and make decisions. So obviously, again, in ours, we've been able to provide you with a real simple, straightforward answer. And we understand that, you know, this is not always going to be the case. And so when you have, again, 2 applicants, we want to make sure it's like, hey, how are differences handled, right? Is it something where you're able to talk things out? Is there occasional yelling? You know, what does that look like? And if there is, where are children at in that process? Is this something, you know, just what it all looks like, and really assess, you know, are we able to have differences? We all know everybody has differences, but then are we able to still maintain and have a safe environment for kids? So, and then part 3 of this, it looks at family violence. So, and then again, it goes into more in depth, on current unstable relationships. So part 3 is different from the first 2 parts in that it has you select a radio button in each part to answer the statement. Then you have the narration box that you can add significant information to if necessary. And so you'll see that first part, it asks you, or it says, the statement is, it was assessed that, it was assessed that there is no family violence within the household. And so again, we have the easy one. And then the alternate to that, though, is it was assessed that family violence that there is family violence within the household, or family may impact the care of children. And so if you had to select this button, again, there's going to be indicators that pop up and mitigation factors. And then that narrative box is going to become required to fill out, right? Because this assessment is going to be asking, hey, if there is violence, how are we mitigating it? What does it look like? How are we creating a home that is safe for kids? You'll notice with this home study that I like to say I was one of those people that wrote home studies where it took very little sometimes to deny a home study. We're really trying to get away from that, right? If there are concerns, it's like we're really wanting to know what are the indicators. So like, what are the concerns and how can we mitigate this? Like, how can we make this home a place that children are going to be safe and going to thrive in? So under current unstable intimate relationships, again, it was assessed there is no concerns regarding unstable partnership, or it was assessed that the applicant is currently involved in an unstable partnership or marriage. So again, if you had to choose that second radio button, you're going to be asked what that looks like. What are the mitigations to, is this possible to make this a stable home? Sometimes we're going to be able to say yes, and sometimes potentially not. And I apologize. I said that there was 3 parts to this, but there's actually 5. So moving on to part 4. With part 4, this is where we're going to detail any children the applicants may have. And so in this section, you'll notice in the first part, it will show you who the child is or children. So this part is what populates from what the applicants put in on their side. You'll notice though that description of the child. So the description of the child is something that that you will have to put in, or excuse me, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, you will have to put that in. But the child, so child 1, let's say, for example, you're dealing with a home that has 3 children. You would see when you open this up, that part 1 will have child 1, 2, and 3. And so all of those sections need to be completed. The second part, and so this is all one page. We had to break it into 3 screenshots to fit it. But then you will see, describe your interview or observation, including dates and like how the observation went. So you'll see here, we just wrote that that the worker interviewed the child in person during an in-home visit, et cetera, et cetera. He's not scared in his home, loves school. Jackson, his mom usually talks to him if he has a hard time controlling his behavior, right? So we want to make sure that we are asking and assessing for all those different things that we are currently already assessing for, as far as like our kids, do they feel safe at home? What does discipline look like for them? Who can they talk to if they maybe don't feel comfortable talking to a parent? Do they have other safe adults, etc.? The last part of part 4 is speaking specifically about grief and loss related to infertility or loss of children. And this is something that is new, right? Some people may have gotten into a habit of doing this on their own in their home studies, but this is specifically a new section. So you'll notice here, and Addie mentioned it, so you'll notice on this screenshot, there's applicant A's response and applicant B's response. So this is where whatever the applicant answers on their side in their personal information, that is the information that will come in here that will populate for you. As mentioned before, it's only to be used as information for you. It will not show up in the final home study, and it's based for you to use as a guide. You then will still have to go down, and you'll see it asks grief and loss related to infertility or loss of child. You will still have to input information, again, based on what the applicants put in their information and on your conversation that you have while you're assessing the family. Okay, and lastly, so part 5. So again, this is where you're going to be looking at assessing the applicant's ability to set boundaries in relationships, any stress the applicant may experience, and how they manage that stress, and any other adults in the home or on the property that could potentially provide care to the child. This is an area we might add narrative that may be significant. And so you'll notice, you see down at the bottom, and skip to the bottom really quickly, but an example of something that is significant, but maybe not necessary. An example could be information provided by the applicant is consistent with reports from other collateral information and observations from this writer, right? Where it's like, it's not where it's like major, but it's also like, hey, I'm noticing, right? Maybe a relative came over during one of the visits. They had a good relationship. She's speaking, kindly about everybody. I'm observing that. So that's one of those things where it's like, it says include significant narrative. That's an example of something that you could put in. So you'll notice, I'm going to jump back up to the first part of part 5. So you'll notice it asks us to describe any existing boundaries in relationships. And so we, for this example, just put Melissa has healthy relationships with her family, right? She does not have to practice any specific boundaries. But if, let's say you are dealing with a family where maybe we do have somebody who is not that great, right? Maybe they're struggling with addiction or what have you. We want to know, like, how does the applicant set boundaries with them? Like, this person is not allowed at the house, unless so-and-so is home, or this is somebody that we only communicate with via text message, etc. So just what do those boundaries look like? Describe any stress the applicant experiences in relationships and how they manage it. So everybody knows we all go through stress. We just want to make sure that we're assessing how people are managing that. Like, do they have good self-care? Do they have people they can call? Do they take walks? Right on here, if something stressful comes up, do they have somebody they can talk to? And then other adults in the home or on the property. So again, in this section, we chose to put that there was no other adults, but if there are other adults in the home, you want to make sure that you're going through and documenting what their role is, how they will be caring for kids, if they're helping at all, if they live on the property, are they renters, are they people that won't be involved at all, etc. And then healthy relationships. It was assessed that the applicant has or have healthy relationships. Again, if you had to select that second radio button, that they have a chaotic, limited, or lack of relationship, again, we are going to want to see what those indicators are and how they are mitigated, and how, even if the applicants have those types of relationships, are they able to have those relationships, create boundaries, and keep kids safe? So I noticed we have some questions and comments in the chat. We're going to try to save those for the end so that we can get through all the information that we have planned for today. We do have a section of today that is reserved for questions and answers, so we will definitely get to those. If we don't get to those, we will definitely make sure that they are answered in the Q&A document. Before we continue on, I know between Addie, myself, and Carl, in a little while, we're throwing a lot of information at you. There's a lot of sections, a lot of parts. So we just wanted to do another poll just to, again, gauge how you guys are doing. This one does have a correct answer. Please don't worry whether you select the right answer. This is just a way for us to continue learning. And so Mike is going to put the poll up in the screen. And so the question is, which of these sections has multiple parts to complete? Is it A, trauma, B, current relationships, C, backgrounds and family of origin, D, caregiver health and well-being, or E, all of the above? Okay. And so on here we have 4%. So we're going to go over this. Can is everybody able to see the answers, or just I can see them and I'm reading them to you guys? Yeah, okay. So 4% said A has multiple sections. 4% said current relationship has multiple parts. 3% said background and family origin has multiple parts. And then 88% said all of the above. The correct answer is E, all of the above. So what you will notice with this, with the new home study is each section will typically have multiple parts that need to be completed. As you get towards the end of the home study, there are a couple sections that are single sections, but almost every section on here has multiple parts that need to be completed before the entire section is completed.
Alicia, can I answer the question that was in the box real quick?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I haven't seen it. Can you read the question then?
The question was, I thought earlier she said that if something does not apply, we do not have to put anything in the box. Going through all these boxes are filled in. She has not experienced infertility. There are no others on the property. So do we need to fill in all the boxes or not? That's the question. And the answer to that is yes, you do need to fill in something in there, yes. So there aren't any others on the property, or, these issues were resolved or something. So there has to be some type of explanation in each of those boxes so that we understand that it wasn't just missed or overlooked, etc. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Pam.
Thanks, Alicia.
Yeah.
And can I clarify real quick to Jessica? The difference in those boxes that Alicia was talking about and Pam, is most of those are required narrative boxes. It's the ones that you don't need to fill in if it isn't significant to the assessment is the box that specifically says include narrative that is specific to the assessment. That's the box where if there isn't anything significant, you do not need to fill in. But the other boxes were all required. They all had the red asterisk next to them. So those are the boxes that you have to fill out.
Thank you. And did that answer the question? I'm going to assume yes. Okay. So we're going to continue on with the sections. And so the next section that we are looking at is caregiving / parenting experience. This is a shared section, and you'll only have to complete it once for if it's a two applicant home or multiple applicant home. I know there was a question about if there's other applicants. It will only need to be filled out one time. And so with this section, there are two parts. So part one of this section will ask you to describe the applicant's parenting experience, their knowledge or experience with foster care, and the applicant's current or expected parenting style. If any concerns arise with these parts, you should document how they were mitigated. And so you'll see on ours, on part one, the story that we created or that has been created for Melissa Cannon is that, she's a single parent. She has a 6-year-old. And you'll notice down with the section that asks for any child welfare experience. So the narrative that we created is that growing up, Melissa's family did respite care. And so she has some experience in that. She had foster children or children in the foster care system in her home with her growing up, but on short-term experiences. So you can see we put that narrative so people understood what her experience looks like. On the second part, it describes or it asks us to describe the applicant's current or expected parenting style. And so that's one of the things that you really want to make sure that we're looking at, especially if you're dealing with somebody who maybe has never been a parent or doesn't have a whole lot of experience. what do parenting styles look like, or how do they feel they might parent? Do they understand, what it could potentially look like to parent children who have experienced trauma, and have seen some things that maybe your average child may not. And so we just want to really make sure that we are assessing that here. If certain things come up where it's like, maybe there are concerns, please make sure that you document those and document the process you went through to mitigate those concerns, so that you felt comfortable or secure in approving this home study. In part 2, you will document how the applicant manages parenting roles and responsibilities. If there are 2 applicants, how are responsibilities shared, right? You will need to document the applicant's participation in training and prudent parenting. In the prudent parenting area, you will notice that the top radio button has been selected and the worker would not be required to add any additional narrative. When the second radio button is selected, indicating that there are concerns with the applicant's ability to promote prudent parenting, the narrative box becomes required for you to fill in. In the narrative box, you should describe any concerns and how they were mitigated if applicable. And so you'll notice, again, on this section, and so you see on the first part of this, in the first picture, every statement has a red asterisk. So it will require something to be put in the narrative box. And so that is very different. If you look at picture 2, you see, because we chose the top radio button, include this will now say, when you guys open it, include narrative significant to this assessment. So, but because we chose the top one, this narrative box is not required, again, unless there's something that you feel is significant to the assessment. And so I want to go back. So in this training section, you will notice, so you will be asked to select the radio button that applies to your family. So if you know that you will be working with kinship caregivers who maybe are doing unlicensed, then you would select one of those, the top one where it says that, training was not required. But if you're dealing with families that are doing a kinship license, you will select what is necessary. We selected that the applicant completed training required as part of the licensing requirements, right? Because we're treating this home study as a licensed caregiver. So the next part of this is looking at child development and expectations. And so with this section, there are 3 parts that need to be assessed. This is also a shared section and only needs to be completed once. This section should reflect both of the applicants, if applicable. Like some of the other sections, this has parts that will be answered by selecting a radio button and then adding any significant information to the narration box. There will also be parts that require you to complete the narration box in order to continue. And so it's really, once you guys get in here and start working in this, right, it's gonna become very, very normal, and you just will get into it, right? And so with part 1 of this, it pertains to assessing whether the applicants demonstrate knowledge about child development, including the effects of trauma on childhood development. You will also be documenting whether or not the applicants are open and available to assessing services for children, if that's something that is needed. And so you'll see that top radio button under demonstrated knowledge. It specifically states the applicant's demonstrated knowledge about child development, including cognitive, physical, emotional, social development, and appropriate expectations for routines, chores, et cetera, et cetera. It also talks about like the effects of trauma on childhood development, et cetera. Or you could choose concerns. Again, if there's concerns, We want to know what those are, right? You need to speak specifically to those and how they were mitigated. Keeping in mind a concern may just be this individual has never, parented a child in the foster care system. They have limited understanding of what trauma looks like. However, these are the things that we've done to mitigate that, right? So a concern doesn't necessarily have to be a huge concern. It could just be maybe we're dealing with something or somebody or some persons who have a limited, parenting repertoire. On that second screenshot where it says services, we want to know if you have a child in your home that needs support. Are you going to be somebody that is able to get kids to the services that they need? Are you committed to making that part of your routine? Or is it something where it's like, no, we don't necessarily agree with counseling, or we don't, okay, how can we mitigate that, right? Is if you're not willing to transport, do we have other people in your family or family and friends that would be open to helping with that? So really just, again, looking at looking at the indicators, right? And then figuring out what mitigations apply. We can go to the next slide. In part 2, this section covers assessing and documenting the applicant's knowledge and understanding of each specific stage of development children go through. So in this part, you will see that there are boxes that state applicant A and applicant B. So again, this is one where there will be information that populates over from the personal information. Again, as we mentioned before, that is, again, just information for your information, and it will help you with your assessment, but it should not be your full assessment. You will then be asked to, as it shows at the bottom, write your assessment and break down, what you have gone over with the family. So one thing to keep in mind with this, there are 5 different ages and stages. And so you'll see here, there are 5, there are going to be 5 boxes. We only showed 2 because to try and fit everything on the screen would have made this extremely difficult. But so it says, you'll see the first one that says the applicant's understanding and expectations for newborn infant stage of development. We also are toddler, preschool age of development, and it goes on. I'll show you on the next slide what all of the stages are, but we're basically wanting to know what the applicant's understanding and expectation is for each of the, for each of the ages and stages. One thing that we want to point out for our kinship caregivers, if they have a child placed in their home that is 5, and maybe then that 5-year-old has older siblings, you only are going to have to start at the age of the youngest child. So at the age of the 5-year-old, and complete all of the subsequent stages of development. For all of our general foster care licenses, you will have to complete every stage, all 5 stages, regardless of the age that the family is asking for. And we're asking for that to take place because if in the future there's a modification to the license, we've already covered our ground, right, and documented the necessary information. Okay, we can switch to the next slide. All right, and so like I said to you, so these are all 5 of the stages of development that you will be asked to document on. So newborn infant, toddler preschool, school age, pre-adolescent, and adolescence. And so really, again, we're just wanting to know, do the applicants understand, how to parent a child from any of these age ranges, what are their expectations, right? Like, what are your expectations of a newborn? I don't have any expectations. They're going to sleep. I'm going to feed them. We're going to change clothes, change diapers, make sure, everything is met. But then maybe once we get to school age and pre-adolescence, we expect that maybe they help with a couple chores or, pick up after themselves, etc. Okay. So in part 3, we are going to assess and document the applicant's planned approach when a child is not meeting their developmental milestones. Some of the things to consider in this section would be, does the applicant have knowledge of and access to resources to support the development of a child in their home? Is the applicant open to additional training? This part should include any concerns that may arise and if they were mitigated. This part can also include if you have provided resources, right? Like we want to make sure that we're documenting what has been done. So it's like, hey, maybe a family didn't have knowledge of local counseling services. And that's something that was provided to them by yourself as the worker on the case. Make sure that you're documenting that and showing, again, how the topic or the issue was mitigated. Okay, I see questions. I have chat over on the side and I see, okay, Alexa, you're just following up behind me.
Yes, I believe that's what you said. So I just reiterated.
Thank
you. Am I right?
I appreciate it. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. We're going to continue on then. And so behavior management. So actually, I'm going to pass it to Carl.
Yep.
Carl's going to take us through behavior management.
So we're going to talk about behavior management. This section is virtually equivalent to the discipline section in the old home study framework, right? So as Alicia discussed, most of these sections contain more than one part. So these next few sections that I'm going to discuss, they all contain 2 parts, right? In her previous examples, we had like current relationships, might have had like 5 parts, but these sections, such as behavior management, is going to contain 2 parts. And then also, if there are 2 applicants on the application, you only have to complete the discipline section once. So this section should reflect the responses for both applicants in terms of both of their discipline approaches. Okay, so the first section is part 1. And in this section, you will see, sorry about that. Sorry about that. In this section, you will see information that is going to auto-populate from the personal information form. So in WACAP, when applicants are completing their application, you'll notice that they'll have to complete a personal information form within WACAP. And so WACAP captures that information and auto-populates some of the relevant information into this section, right? So some of the information that might have been captured from the personal information form is the applicant's responses to how they were disciplined and rewarded as children. So you'll see some of this populated here, but you will be documenting how the applicants were disciplined and rewarded as children and what discipline and reward looks like for the children in the home and who is also going to be responsible for disciplining the children. So if this is both applicants that are going to be disciplining the children, you're going to indicate that in this section as well. Also, and we can go to the next slide, Mike. Part 2. This is where you're going to be summarizing what children, so if the applicants do have their own bio children or any children currently residing in the home with them, you're going to be summarizing what the child responses are, right? The youth responses, or, even adult children, right? Any collateral reports about how the applicant does discipline currently in the home. You're going to also be documenting how the applicants will help children in the home understand the rules, and finish out the section by indicating how the applicants were assessed regarding the discipline practices. So also, this is going to be the section, right, where a lot of times we see clarification in regards to the applicant will not use physical discipline or withhold food and water as a form of punishment, right? So this is where you'll capture a lot of that information too in this section. However, in the event that you do encounter responses from the applicant that may indicate inappropriate discipline practices, right? Maybe previously or even currently, you'll notice that there will be a radio button and a drop-down menu that where you will have to answer how it was assessed. That if there was inappropriate discipline, you'll see a drop-down menu which gives you options on how you can respond in terms of how they were able to mitigate this concern. So just throwing that out there. And we're going to move on to the next section. Mike, if you could. Okay, so home study, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this section would be more equivalent to the religious, spiritual, and cultural section in the old home study framework, right? So you're going to see in this section, in part one, this section is also going to be for both applicants. So you only have to complete this section one time. This should reflect the responses for both applicants, right? And this is going to be for how it's going to also auto-populate from the personal information form. And it's going to talk about the applicant's cultural background. This section is going to cover how the applicants will support and encourage a child's cultural background. Also, it's going to include the applicant's understanding of racism and how others experience this in the world, and how the applicants will support a child's religious or spiritual affiliation. So a lot of this, again, we already do a lot of this work in the old home study framework. So not too much has changed when it comes to the information that you do capture and document. Okay. So it's also important to note too, when you are completing the home study in WACAP, we want you to continue your current interview process and practices, right? The way in which that you capture and receive information. Like, remember, when you're completing the home study, you're not going to be using the home study as a template per se to ask each question that's indicated on in WACAP, right? You're going to capture this information how you generally do it now, smoothly, naturally, in your natural interview process, and then you're going to come back in and fill in the blanks and enter in the narrative boxes that's applicable to the information that you did capture. So I just wanted to make that known. And let's go on to the next slide, Mike. We're going to go to part two. So part two of the cultural section, diversity section, is going to talk about how the applicants are going to be able to support and affirm a child's sexual orientation and gender identity expression, as well as youth and children that identify as LGBTQ. So in this section, you're going to finalize this section by confirming the applicant's ability to be supportive and affirming, and you will also indicate if concerns were identified and document concerns as they pertain to the assessment. So again, within the ability to parent area, if you select a radio button that indicates there were concerns, right, when it comes to how a parent will support a child's gender identity, their spiritual affiliations or religious or cultural affiliations, this is where you're going to add the mitigation narration as well. So this is part two. Again, this section should reflect both applicants if there are two applicants. So you should only have to complete this section one time. So we're going to move on to the next. The next slide. So for families that you work with who may not know what SOGI is, right? SOGI is the acronym for sexual orientation, gender identity expression. When you're having these discussions, we have included this gender unicorn in the resources section for your reference. So this link is to transstudent.org, and the gender unicorn can also be shown in numerous different languages for our families that speak multiple languages. So, and Mike posted that link in the chat for you. Okay, Mike, we can go to the next slide. This is the education section. So as we do now, we're going to talk about the parents' ability to support a child's education. So this section is also broken down in two parts, and is in regards to the applicant's education and how their own experience impacts their perspective of education for the child or children in care. So part one, we're going to talk about the applicant's education and how their own experience impacts their ability and perspective of education for the child. Also, in the event that, again, if you encounter information that may be a concern or could indicate that more information is needed, you'll see a radio button and a drop-down menu will appear, and it will you'll be asked to select whatever mitigation options are available that applies to describe in the narration box of how they went about mitigating whatever information might have been indicated. So we're going to go to part two now, Mike. Part two of the education section. This section, you're going to talk about the applicant's educational goals for the children in the home. Also, if they're comfortable with advocating and supporting a child that might have educational challenges. Again, you'll have the option of an indicator, a narrative box that pops up if there is additional information that needs to be clarified or information that needs to be mitigated. And I know that we're using these terms a lot more now, right? Because we wanted you to get familiar with the indicators and mitigation terms. You're going to be hearing this all throughout the home study, and this is part of the terminology and language and framework that we're going to be operating under when we are assessing these families. So we can keep it going, Mike. The next section is going to be the resources section. So this is going to be equivalent to like the family system, support system section, right? And this should also reflect both of the applicants. So in this section, you're going to talk about like the network of people that surrounding the family, who supports them, the schools, who's going to transport the child if they have assistance with that, and just anything that pertains to the family that you would answer concerning their support systems in the old home study. So you're going to do the same thing here. And again, if there is anything of concern that needs to be mitigated, you'll have the radio button as an option to clarify more information of how you guys were able to strategize and mitigate whatever concerns might have popped up, if any. So I hope that makes sense. So again, we just covered 4 sections of the home study. Should be familiar to you. Bear in mind, these 4 sections that I covered, I'm just going to reiterate there. You only have to do this one time. The answers should reflect both applicants. And so that covers it for this section. And so I'm going to pass it back to Alicia, and she's going to talk about the home environment, right? Section of the home study.
It helps if I come off mute. Okay, so the home environment section consists of 5 separate parts that will need to be completed. This section, again, is a shared section, so only needs to be completed one time. And then throughout this section, you'll be either filling in required narrative boxes or selecting radio buttons where you'll either have answered the questions, or you will need to follow up your selection with narrative that is significant to the assessment. And so part 1 of the of the home section. You can see we've got it on 2 slides because it's pretty hefty, but consists of providing a description of the home, describing the sleeping arrangements, who will be sleeping where. Please keep in mind that we no longer use the term master bedroom or bathroom due to historical racism associated with the term. Please, if this is something that you have not started doing, please instead use main or primary bathroom and bedroom when describing that main bedroom. You should also include if children will be sleeping on different floors than the adults. In this section, you will also be documenting whether safe sleep was discussed with the family and if it applies to the applicant's assessment. If the third radio button is selected indicating concerns were observed with safe sleep requirements, you will be asked to include the concerns and mitigation if applicable. This is also one of those sections. So when we talk about include significant narrative related to the assessment, this could be one of those situations where, yes, the family, like, let's say, I'll give an example for the safe sleep section. Maybe you're able to click at the time of completion that safe sleep for this family is applicable. But maybe when you first started working with the family, maybe they were sleeping with a child in the bed, or they had a crib, but I'm going way back. They had drop down sides on the crib or baby bumpers or any of that fun stuff. That stuff that you want to include, even though you don't have to include, that is information that is significant, right? It goes back to kind of that math problem where we're asking you to, show us your work. When we first started working with this family, this is what it looked like. We have now reached a place where safe sleep is something that this family has achieved. And these are the steps that we took, or the mitigation that we took to get to this place. So again, if there are things where it's like, yes, our family's meeting that, but it was a little bit of a journey to get there, please go ahead and show your work. Again, if safe sleep is something where there are concerns, and it's still, the family has not been able to mitigate it, or it's still a concern when you're getting close to the end of your home study, please make sure that you're documenting that as well, and showing like what all you've tried to do to work with the family. You can go on to the second part of this. So part 2 of the section documents any weapons the family may have and how they are stored. Please keep in mind that you do not have to, you no longer, need to write each individual gun or weapon the applicants have. We just need to be making sure that it's documented that they are stored appropriately. In this part, you will also be assessing if toxic materials are kept inaccessible, and if the applicants have a plan for keeping alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana inaccessible to children. So there's 3 radio buttons to choose from. One for, and you'll notice with this one, you have to select, I'm sorry, there's more than 3, it's 4. There's 4 radio buttons here, and you'll notice that they go side by side with what type of home study is being done. So you'll see it was assessed that there are no weapons. So then you just select that. But if it was assessed that there are weapons, you need to make sure that you're selecting the correct one based on if the family is getting licensed, or if it's an unlicensed placement, or the final one is there were concerns observed. And then you will again be asked what the indicators are of that and how it was mitigated. The same, so for toxic materials and alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana, again, it was either assessed that these materials are kept inaccessible, or there are concerns. etc. Mike, we can go to the next slide. In part 3, so again, so we wanted to show you again a little bit what it looks like when you do have to choose maybe there is a concern. So the first part of this, in part 3, we're going to be asking about how medications are kept. Again, in this area, there's radio buttons specific to if this is pertaining to a license or an unlicensed home study, and then if there is concerns. There's also a section on pets and vaccines, and hey, does the family have pets? If so, are they friendly? Are kids going to be safe, or are the families, pets safe around children? Are children going to be safe around the animals? Or maybe you're dealing with a family that doesn't have any animals. And then there's sanitation and kind of safety concerns. And so we're showing you 2 screens on this. So the second shot and the third shot are the same. We just wanted to show. So if you chose the home appears sanitary, you'll get that narration box that is not required to be filled in. However, if you end up having to choose that second radio box, the home is unsanitary and or immediate safety concerns were observed, you're going to be asked to select the indicators, and then you're going to be asked to, again, please describe and detail the related mitigations that you used to resolve the situation. In part 4, we are looking at any outbuildings on the property and if there are potential hazards that could harm children. If an outbuilding contains dangerous items or heavy machinery, describe how children will be kept safe around these things. If you select either the second or the third radio button in part 4, you will be asked to describe what the potential hazards are and either how they will or will not affect the safety of children. In this narrative box, you will document how the hazards are mitigated and any supervision plans that may end up being in place. And then lastly, on part 5, this section documents if the applicants have access to essential services and food. Some of the things to keep in mind when assessing this section are that resources vary throughout the state, right? Depending on where you work, who you are working with. And in some regions, they can be plentiful. And in others, they can be real minimal. And so making sure that you're describing any information that you provided to the applicants regarding resources available in their community, anything that you can do to show, like if we're dealing with maybe somebody who's I'll just say like a family that lives in the country where maybe they don't have access right to a city, but it's like they need additional food or even just help with tutoring or what have you. If you have access to that information, please make sure that, well, one, that you're giving it to the families, but then also documenting that. All right. So the next thing that we're looking at is occupation and finances. There are 3 parts that need to be covered in occupation and finances. Again, this is one of our shared sections and only has to be completed once. Part 1 wants you to provide a summary of the applicant's occupation and current work schedule. It also asks that you document any current or anticipated childcare plan and the applicant's transportation plan, right? So we want to know, hey, if you or you and a partner both work, Are kids going to be in before school care and after school care? Are they going to be in all day childcare if they're little and not yet in school? Who's picking up whom and who's dropping off, et cetera, et cetera. In part 2, it specifically asks about any military experience the applicants may have. This is answered by selecting the radio button that is applicable to the family. And so you'll notice additional narrative can be added, but is not required. But on here, you have 5 choices where it's like there's no applicant experience, or the applicant doesn't, neither applicant if it's a 2-parent home. The applicant does have military experience or is currently in the military. One applicant has military, or neither. So please just make sure you're selecting what is applicable. I see stuff coming through in the chat. Is there anything? Okay. Okay.
Nakia just asked about, so
yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. So in part 3 of the occupation and finances, we want to make sure that we're addressing the applicant's income. This section also has you select a radio button depending on what is applicable to the applicant. This part has both licensed and unlicensed options. Although there is no required narrative box, this box needs to be completed based on what home study track the family is completing in their home study in. And we'll talk more about tracks in our 2-day training, but it's basically, are they doing general foster care or kinship license, etc. As shown on the second picture, if it is assessed that there are concerns regarding the income or other resources of the applicant, you will need to select all mitigation selections and provide a summary of the concern and mitigation if applicable. And so you see on here, it just asks, applicants, maybe we are dealing with somebody who has a limited income, but they are able to get their food resources met by community food banks or what have you, right? We want to make sure that we are selecting the appropriate indicators and then writing what our mitigation was. Okay, so the next part is one of our single part sections. I'm like, yay, it only needs to be, it's a shared section and it only needs to be completed once. And what you see on the screen is what you will be dealing with. And we actually did this one. So it's actually just a one screen, but we wanted to show you what it looked like if you had to select the second radio button. And so in this part, you can select that all references responded and provided a positive reference, or one or more references, including adult children, did not respond or provided a negative reference. Once you have selected the radio button that applies, you will be asked to provide a brief summary of the references. And so with either of these, right, even if you got everything back and it's positive, we still want a brief summary of just what people are saying about the applicant or applicants. And then again, on the flip side, if somebody didn't respond or there's some negative comments, we want to know, what was the, it says, please select all that apply, right? What are the indicators? And again, a brief summary of references, if any concerns were reported, how they are mitigated. I think you guys understand the theme, yes? Okay. And so this next part that we're going to look at, it's going to be on 2 slides. So in this section, So one is the clearances. And so in this section, a box for each eligible person will automatically populate. So you see on screen 1, how it says criminal history number 1. So because the home study we did is just a single applicant and there's no other adults or children over 16 or over in this home, the only background clearance we are seeing is for Melissa. If this was a 2 applicant home or you had additional people that had to complete background checks, every single one of their checks are going to show up on, like you see Melissa's. So below the automated boxes are radio buttons to select, indicating if there were or were not any additional concerning clearance issues outside of the background check process. If there are concerns, please document those in the radio box. If the first radio box is selected, there may not be any narrative to add, right? Because the background check unit did their job. The people, your applicants pass their background check, all is good. Can we go to the next slide, Mike? So if the second radio box is checked in the background section, you will be asked to select all check boxes. Excuse me, you will be asked to select all check boxes that apply and provide information within the narrative box. You will be asked to summarize mitigation strategies. If the concerns were not mitigated, please describe why not. Narrative may include something like the applicant has a history of child welfare services over 10 years ago when their child was placed into kinship care. This was during a time when the applicant was struggling with substance misuse, subsequently received services, and has been clean and sober since that time. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So I'm now going to pass it on to Addie, and she's going to finish out the sections.
Okay. Maria, do you have a question that can't wait? No. Oh, your hand is up in the screen. Okay. We will move on to legal permanency. This is a shared section, again, with as many of the others were. So this assessment, in this example that we provided, Melissa Cannon, our applicant, is not applying for adoption. She's applying to be a respite provider. So we indicated here that she would be, it would not include a recommendation for legal permanency. However, you may have families that do, of course. And so you would select the radio button. There are 4 choices there that would correspond to your applicant for your specific applicant or applicants. Like I said, it's a shared section, so you won't be filling out something separate for applicant A versus B. And then, okay, so for Melissa, this doesn't apply. She's not applying for legal permanency. This assessment, so the options are this assessment is for placement purposes. That would be mostly concerning perhaps our, I guess, foster care, but also could be our kinship provider. Maybe they aren't ready to move forward with adoption. They really hope that maybe the parents can get can mitigate their own issues and get placement of their children again. This third button is for more of different, for permanency, but for different types of permanency, not necessarily adoption. So if we have the guardianship, that would be what this would be for. The 4th section, or the fourth choice, is more for adoption. Following here, we're only going to include narrative significant to the assessment in this one. I put in here the application is for foster care license to offer respite care only, and I included that because she's not applying for a full license. So that's why I felt at that point it would be significant to the assessment versus someone who's applying for a foster care license, full foster care license. Okay, so then moving on, for the legal permanency, I'm sorry. Could you go back for a second, Mike? I'm sorry. I meant moving on to the next page here. Oh, never mind. You're right. Go ahead. Sorry. Oh, okay. So now we're on to sources of information for adoption. Again, this is a shared section. You're not going to fill something separate out for applicant A or B. In this section, you have two options here. Please select from the following, not applicable for this assessment, or the following sources of information were used in this home study assessment. So again, for our applicant here, she's not applying for permanency, so it's not applicable for this assessment. However, easily you could have someone who is applying for foster care license as well as potential adoption. So in that case, you will select the following sources of information were used for the home study assessment if your applicant is applying for permanency. And so you will see in the second box the following sources of information, and you will have to select each of those that required or that you used for this assessment. And let's see. If you wouldn't mind muting, I'm hearing some additional noise. Oh, there we go. Thanks. Okay, so the following sources of information were used in this home study. You will select what you've used, like I said, what you've used for this assessment. And then let's see if you could go to the next page, Mike. Thank you. Okay, so then the core concepts of adoption. So again, for us in this as example, we are not applicable, but if it were to be, the core concepts of adoption were discussed with the applicants. And these are the core concepts that are included. And this hasn't changed since the previous home study framework. Concept of adoption, guardianship, long-term foster care is a lifelong developmental process and commitment. These are the same things that we've been discussing with our applicants in the previous form of the home study. Okay, if you move on, there we go. Thank you. So, okay, so the evaluation portion, this is where you're going to discuss your evaluation of the home study and make your recommendations. So the first part is asking you to document the applicant's engagement. So we selected during the home study process, the applicants presented as engaged and cooperative, or during the home study process, the applicant was challenging to engage and or uncooperative. So if you choose the second one, let's see, also to summarize the, you will also be asked to summarize motivation. If you have an applicant that is not engaged, you will include narrative significant to that assessment. Why weren't they engaged? What strategies you used, whether or not you feel that that applicant would not be capable of caring for a child in a safe manner. The next box will ask you to summarize the applicant's motivations, specific children that are placed in the home. If you have someone, this won't happen as often for this group of folks, but for assessment, state assessment workers, who are working with kinship placements, they will more often have a kid, will have children in the home. And then you'll also discuss placement dates if applicable. The next box, we are describing strengths, skills, and commitment as it relates to caring for children. So again, this is your assessment. This is from all the work that you've done, the paperwork that was completed, that you gathered. And we do have a raised hand, but I'm going to try to get through this part and then we can, I'll answer questions. Or if you put something in the chat, Laura, one of the other trainers could help you with that question. Okay, and then let's see the second box on this page, your insights and awareness. During the home study process, the applicant demonstrated insight or awareness is demonstrated by acknowledging concerning behaviors or relationships. The second one is lack of insight or awareness. So that if you choose the second one, if you found a concern of lack of insight or awareness, you would then, again, include narrative significant to your assessment in that box below. Okay, got it, Laura, thank you. Okay, so then next page, please. Oh, let's see. Is this the same? Looks like the same slide. There we go. Okay, part 2. Great, thank you. Part 2 of the evaluation section, the first box asks you to describe concerns or limitations, if they were mitigated or not, and how mitigation supports the care of children. Our applicant here had no concerns for, but we often do see concerns in our work. And so you will describe those here. The mitigation, the process that you use to mitigate those concerns, whether perhaps you provided some education, whether you asked someone to take additional classes for a specific topic, you would put that information here. And the next box asks you to summarize your outcome and recommendation. And so this is where you're making that recommendation. This is what would have been all the way at the bottom of the page for our previous home studies that will be changing. So this is the your overall assessment here and recommendations. If you could move forward, Mike, thank you. You'll notice on this page, the home study information, we have some missing information, progress saved, but we aren't able to finalize here. This is where we're going to, a lot of this information is what will bump to the top of the home study. If you noticed in that template that you looked at initially, a lot of the information is rearranged in different orders. So this is the information that you will be talking about home study information, but it will populate at the top of the page. So the type of home study, foster care license, kinship license, or kinship care or kinship license. So those are your options. You'll likely mostly be dealing with foster care license, but you might have some kinship placements as well. Home study outcome, your recommendation for placement. So whether it's approved or not, or approved for adoption, or approved from whatever type of home study you're doing. And then this is the ICPC place. If you were doing an ICPC, it would be here. Names of specific children, if there are any, who the home study was written by. So DCYF for state workers, and CPA. If you choose CPA, you're going to be asked to name the CPA. So you'll see here the CPA name that we chose here. And then we do have this page complete. So if you could move forward, Mike, to our next page. Great. Worker information. So here's where you put your own name, your title, your supervisor's title. And again, this information will populate on the home study. So we'll throw it to Carl, who's going to talk a little bit more about indicators and mitigation.
How's everyone feeling about indicators and mitigation? So I know we've been hearing this term a lot, and we're going to continue to utilize these terms. And I do just want to talk about this briefly. You're going to get a better visual representation of what this looks like when Addie does her live demo of what the home studies looks like in WACAP when we're doing it live. But so indicators and mitigation. So Mike, if you can go to the next slide for us. So as we mentioned earlier, an indicator is a tool to identify potential areas that need additional information before we can finalize a home study. So bear in mind, an indicator can be both positive or negative, right? But it's meant to serve as an area where additional information is needed, so that way we can clarify our assessment. So, and it's also not meant to serve, so if an indicator is present, it's not meant to serve as a recommendation to place a child there or not, right? So it's just there to clarify additional information that's needed. But I do want to give you kind of an example, because there were a lot of questions that were asked earlier today about what check boxes we need to check whenever we're capturing information during our interview process. What information do we need to enter into WACAP, into the home study, and things of that nature, right? So I just wanted to give you one example. And obviously you'll see this visual representation later with Addie, but for an example, for indicators, let's just say you're filling out a home study in WACAP, and now you're at the trauma section, right? We covered the trauma section earlier, but let's just say we talked about how we're using this assessing term, right? It's no longer yes or no questions. We're clarifying if it was assessed that the applicant was exposed to trauma during their childhood, right? So let's just say we have an applicant that did experience childhood trauma. And if we check that it was assessed that the applicant did, you're going to see a bunch of different indicators that pop up. So it's going to be a whole list of check boxes that you're going to check which is applicable. And I'm going to read off, even though you can't see my screen, you'll see this later, but I just wanted to provide some clarity. So if you were to check that an applicant was exposed to childhood trauma, you'll see a list of different options that pop up, like what kind of trauma: bullying, community violence, complex trauma, disaster, negligent treatment, physical abuse, sexual abuse, terrorism. You're just going to see a whole list of different boxes that you're going to check which ones are applicable. But when you're completing this home study in WACAP, bear in mind, you're not supposed to, we're not encouraging you to go out there and ask every itemized box, every question that's listed, right? You're going to do your work, continue doing your regular interviews, how you do now, and capture information. And then you'll go back in and check whichever boxes that are applicable. So if there was something that needed to be mitigated that was mentioned, right, in your interview, you're going to check that box because it was mentioned, right? But as we've also talked about, when you are mitigating whatever factors concerning information that could have popped up, we talked about how an indicator could be both positive and negative, right? So an indicator could serve as a tool, an area where you need to enter information that's going to demonstrate how this is promoting resiliency for the applicant, or if it was a concern, how you were able to mitigate that concern. So for it to be both positive and negative, right? I'll give you an example. Let's just say you're interviewing an applicant and the applicant experienced childhood trauma. Sorry, Mike. You can go on to the next slide while I'm talking. So that's meant to indicate childhood trauma. What if an applicant had childhood trauma and now they have to go to counseling, right? Because they might have developed maladaptive coping mechanisms when they were young, and now they're receiving mental health treatment and things of that nature, right? So although initially, if we're interviewing them and an indicator pops up and maybe this was an area of concern, it's now they're going to be able to demonstrate how this can serve as to promote their resiliency and how it could serve to actually support a child, right? Because what if they're now seeking to take placement of a child that's also experiencing mental health issues and things of that nature? And now that person's past experience now turns into a positive, right? Because their past experience is now serving as a way to support the child, as opposed to just judging them just based off, them experiencing trauma. So Alexa mentions it helps us to explore how we can improve the family with resources and support versus not approve. That is correct. Let's keep it going. So we're at mitigation. Let me just keep it going. I was obviously just talking and going through this. So select all mitigation factors that apply. So if you were to check a box there that did need to be mitigated, when it's time to mitigate, you'll also see options, with one of the options being other. So you could either check the other box, and when you check the other box, it does allow you to enter and type in a narrative, right, to explain how you were able to mitigate that concern. And then there's also another box that says it was not mitigated. And if it wasn't mitigated, the worker will have to explain how other factors support the approval. So, and if there is a concern for one or more of the mitigation strategies noted, checking off every mitigation strategy is not required and is likely unnecessary. Pam says, and lets us explain how something that initially looked like a concern is actually a strength for the family. Yes, and this is what we mean by how this tool helps to make home studies more equitable, right? When we're doing these assessments, because especially when it comes to kinship caregivers, right? when kinship caregivers are asked to take placement and serve as relative support, and in the event that they do want to become licensed, right, they might not always have the same starting line that general applicants have. They might have concerns that initially were perceived as biased concerns, right? That might not have contributed to them getting licensed. But now we're trying to make things more equitable, less subjective, and equitable across the board. So these are tools that are going to help. So that's kind of it for my part in terms of indications and indicators and mitigations. But we're going to kind of cover what the final output looks like in this example that Alicia put together. So Mike, if you could take us to the home study example. So this is the final output. So I just want everybody to bear in mind that all the sections, if you noticed in the screenshot examples that we were providing, all the sections were on the left-hand side, and you will enter your responses on the right-hand side, right? So all the sections on the left-hand side are not going to be in the same order as the final output. So there's going to be information that you enter in when you complete the home study, and it might not all be in the exact same order because the final output doesn't look the same, right? And then also it doesn't capture, it's not going to incorporate every answer, right, that you might have documented within it. So it's going to capture certain information. And if you look at the first page, this is serving like a face sheet, right? Where it's giving you all the general information about the applicant, who lives in the household. It indicates what specific tract that the applicant is applying to be licensed for. So obviously for this example, they're being licensed for regular foster care. And this being a regular foster care applicant, Mike, if you could scroll down a little bit. It talks about the household composition. So the very first page is like a face sheet that kind of gives us a snapshot of everybody that lives in the home and what the applicant is applying for and what we're dealing with. And then in the event there was child-specific information or kinship, it will talk about that. But then foster care assessment, page 1, that's going to be kind of like the reason for applying section, right? That we're used to now. The reason for applying the foster care assessment is going to kind of give an assessment of why the family is applying to be licensed, you know, what kind of placements that they're looking for and things of that nature. If you can keep scrolling down, Mike, in this example, they talked about this applicant was applying to be licensed for general foster care license, but yet they only wanted to serve as a respite provider. So they're not on the certified respite track because they're actually doing respite in their own home. So, which is why they're going for the general foster license. But if you notice the trauma section, right? So it's just basically documenting all of your narratives, right? You're not going to see any indicators or no check boxes, no yes or no. And what you will find all throughout the home study is the new terminology that we talked about. We talked about how it's going to say it was assessed that the applicant did not or did experience childhood trauma. So you're going to see this, it was assessed all throughout the home study. And this speaks to our new framework in terms of how we are going about assessing things. Pam mentioned it will be important to prepare the family for the language they will see when they receive their home study. Correct. And I believe in WACAP, they are working on other languages. I believe, right? I believe there is maybe like a Spanish version coming out. Not sure, but
I
go ahead.
meant some of our terms, like using the word historical trauma or just the word trauma itself, that families may not have understood that they experienced trauma.
Gotcha.
And they will see white. So just to prepare them for the language that is in this home study, I think is important.
Right. So an example, when you guys are doing your regular interviews, right, and you're getting this information, you might have your own way of capturing this information. You might not even utilize some of these words, right? However you go about it and getting your information, you're not going to ask everything that's every itemized line on here, right? You're going to do what you're generally doing right now. And then you're going to come back into WACAP and document what you captured. So we can keep going down where are we at? Current relationships. So it talks about that section. Keep scrolling down, Mike. I'm just going to briefly scroll through this. Parenting experience. This is where you're going to see that. And like I said, in each section, it's going to say it was assessed, right? Where you're checking off if there was anything indicated. Child development. You can keep scrolling, Mike. Let's see. Behavior management. That's going to be like the discipline section. You're going to talk about how they discipline their children, the diversity, how they're going to support a child's spirituality, LGBTQ, religious affiliation. What does that say? Education, resources. Those are the sections that I covered, right? You see it all there. The home environment, you know, how many beds are available, safe sleep assessment, all that's going to be covered there. Weapons, if any, pets, if any. You got the occupation and financial, or what's that say? Occupation section, the references section. So, you know, if a relative was a reference, you're going to document all of that there. Background clearances. So if you look at everything, and then you see the legal permanency questions in the event that they choose to adopt, right? So if you look at this new home study template, it's really not too much different from what we see, right? What we're already doing from the old home study framework. So this was just meant to kind of give you a visual representation of what the final output would be. So after you complete the home study, in WALCAP, it'll provide you an option to print this out in PDF. And when you do, it'll transfer all the information onto this PDF document, and it'll put it into this final output form like this. Obviously, you're going to be signing these in WALCAP. So, you know, by the time you do have the final output, you'll also see your digital signatures embedded in there too. But the great thing too is this includes the statement or qualification statement within this home study guide. I know at times I reviewed them and they were like separated at times based on who's submitting it. So, but this is just a visual demonstration, and that's it for me for right now. Again, just due to the sake of time, we're keeping a minimum with the questions because we are capturing all the questions, and we all plan to address every question that is asked, and we will be releasing a separate FAQ document with all of those questions answered. So just bear in mind, we're not overlooking any questions. If you have any, we're capturing everything, and we will try to get to you shortly. Okay. So I'm going to pass this back off to Addie, and she's going to go through the home study guide tour and actually give you guys a demo of what this looks like in WALCAP.
Here's the home study guide. You know, when you first open up this home study in WALCAP, it's obviously very new. It's very different from how we've done our work before. And even though you've asked all these questions, your assessment isn't going to be that much different than what you've done in the past. There are going to be new things. And with the new sections, the indicators, mitigation, different language that we have, you're probably going to have questions about how you do this work and ask questions what you're supposed to be assessing. So when you have those questions, where do you go? Well, inside the home study itself in WACAP, you have the link to the home study practice guide. Now we have practice guides already. And as with the previous practice guide or current for the home study that you're continuing to work in until we migrate over, it tells you that you're not supposed to ask all questions, but this is just a guide to help you get started on your assessment, learn how to do your assessment, give you some tips on what types of questions to ask to complete that assessment. So I will show you in a minute where this is located in WACAP, but right now I just wanted to pull up the guide for you. So keep in mind that this guide is a work in progress. So we have a work group that is going to be looking at how to better align this guide itself to the practice intent and questions for the home study. So that will, things will change. This is the first iteration. It's very helpful right now for the work that you'll be doing once you start work here in September. But there'll be some changes to it with language. And so here's what it looks like. Home study practice guide. Of course, we've got this first page contents. So you've got background, policy, laws, WAC, all of the information that you need to know up front. talks about the different applicants. And this, like I said, this home study is embedded into, the guide is embedded into the home study in WCAP, and you'll be able to click on those links. You saw them a little bit in some of our demonstration earlier, but there's a link for home study practice guide, and it should take you to each of the sections for in the home study guide is where you are directly related to the home study section that you're in. But you can also pull this up as a PDF. You could save a link, which I did here earlier, saved a link just on this, on my Google Chrome browser, and it will pull up this home study document that's available online. If you save, you can also save a copy to your desktop, but please be advised if you do that, that if any edits are made to this document online, you aren't going to have the latest version. So I think it would be best for you to actually save the link on your web browser, so you don't miss any potential updates in the middle of your home study. So and there probably will be some changes just before we get to, there will be another iteration of this as well. So let's go to also have let's see, let's go into the Benti demo. I want to show you where, oh yes, I'm making here. Okay, so show you just where it's located inside the home study itself. I'm going to search for our person here. We have Melissa. Okay, so we're going to select her name, select again, and we'll get into, and again, you'll probably have questions about this. However, when you get into that 2-day in-person training, we're going to go through this a lot. So we're going to show you sections. We'll take you into the actual, not just the home study, but we'll take you into WCAP. So you're going to look at all of these things. Today, we're just focusing on the home study guide and the actual home study. Okay, so here's our applicant data. We mentioned earlier the tiles up here. These are the tiles. So here's your documents tile. And this is where you're going to find your applicant paperwork and the home study. Okay, so we've got this applicant forms first, agency forms. These are the forms that the applicant forms is what your applicant will be filling out on their end of WCAP. So you'll see here financial worksheet, WAC agreements, all of these things that they fill out themselves. You have the ability, they will, if they fill out the applicant medical report confidential, they'll just fill out the top portion, and you'll have to download it and forward it on to the doctor if you want them to, if they're doing the adoption pieces, or if for some reason you feel like you want more information to mitigate a medical concern or something. Okay, so here, further down the page, you'll see the home study. This is where the home study lives. So we're going to click on the home study here link, and it takes us into the home study. And then, as noted, you will see these guide links. So this is where we access this for from the home study itself. So we're an applicant A, name, contact, background. This is basic information. When you click on this link, it should bring you up into, it's taking a while. Let's see. Interesting. Okay, so it's going to take us right to the first page. And because I have this thing across the top of my screen, I can't X out of it. Is there a way to get around that, Mike? Unless I guess I could make it smaller. Oh, sorry, I'll spin this out. Okay. Okay. I'm going to X out of this one because it's not, it brought us to the beginning of the page. So let's go look at something else. Children, let's try children and needs served. Okay, so this is not a child-specific home study that we've worked on, but if you want to look at the guide link from here, find more information about the section. Wow, and it's taking, oh, for some, this is generally this is supposed to take you to the section, and a lot of times it works. And Alicia and I had talked about this. Some people do indicate though that they are not, it takes them back to the beginning of the document every time. And I'm not really sure why it's doing this.
And I can speak to this. So you guys, if this happens to you, if you scroll down to the next page, Addie, will you go to the next page where the table of contents are? You can click on any of the table of contents and it will take you directly to where you're at. I will tell you in our conversations, when Addie has been outside of this training realm, right, there's always technical difficulties. When you click on a link in a certain section, it will take you directly to that section. So you don't have to be scrolling.
And also add, Alicia, also bear in mind though, you can't leave the home study guide open. So if you're clicking on a link, you can't leave it open, because if you do, when you try to click on a different link within the home study, then you're gonna mess up like the algorithm. So you got to close it out.
Yeah.
Then click on whatever link, and then it'll bring you to the correct section that you need to. I don't know if you recall that, Alicia. Sarah talked about it during our last training about how we have to close the PDF, otherwise it'll get discombobulated, if you get what I'm saying. So I just wanted to
Mine always opens to the first page. It doesn't matter. I have.
Oh, yours does?
I wonder if because I saved this link, I haven't saved this link before, but I just saved it so I could pull it up. I wonder if that's why it's pulling up to the very beginning of the document. Normally, in the past, I've been able to open up, and anytime I'm clicking on it in a specific section, it opens directly up to that section. So anyway.
That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know what happened today. Again, we're in training, so of course it's not going to work the way I want it to work to show you. One thing I do want to say though is that what is it? Control F, is that our search function? Let's try Control F. Okay, so if you use Control F, type Control and F at the same time, it pops up this find text in document. So say we want to look up trauma. If for some reason you're not, it just pulls up to the beginning of the document every time. This is another way you can search. So we're gonna, and so when you push the forward button, it's going to bring you to areas where it discusses trauma. So here we're looking at the policies and laws, WACs, we're in indicators. And I think if we go forward again, it'll bring us to the next, let's see. Okay, so now we're into the trauma section. So if it'll keep looking for the word trauma, and so it'll take you to the next section when you push the forward button. So let's take a look at this trauma section, since it's going to be one that's different from how you're doing the home study now. So, oh, hold on, let's see, sorry. I really wish it would just open up to
Addie?
Yeah.
There is a request to, can you go down and zoom your screen so it's a little bit bigger so people can see?
This way, or?
You see down on the side of the document, it's got the micro.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay. Oh yeah, I see the chat up here. Okay, so I'm sorry, because it's not opening to this section, I'm having a hard time finding it. Okay, here we go. Trauma section. I'm going to X out of this because I can scroll. So we'll see here in this trauma section, it's going to tell you the intent. So for trauma, assess whether the applicants and their family members have unresolved trauma that may impact the care of children. So again, we're going to focus on care of children. That's our main focus here with this new intent of the home study intent, the framework. We're trying to remove subjectivity and focus on safety and the care of children. So assess whether there is current or historical trauma that may impact the care of children and or family members who might pose a risk to children in the home. So, and then it gives you some practice tips. So here, this part of the home study will repeat for both applicants as applicable. So you've heard us discuss that language throughout training today, as applicable, both applicants as applicable, because that's where this language comes from. Ensure you fill out the section for both applicant A and B. So this will be part of your interview process for your assessment. You'll be interviewing both applicants. Generally, you're going to you should be doing a separate interview for each applicant, at least for part of their assessment or interview process. So you will, collect this information separately for each applicant. You may need to introduce the concept of trauma during the interview process prior to, and so this speaks to Pam's comment about introducing this language. You might want to prep. We're not going to use all of the social worker terms when we are interviewing our applicants necessarily related to trauma. We're not going to, necessarily ask about intergenerational trauma. However, we want to, by the end of the home study, as they're looking at it, reviewing their home study, you want to make sure that that you've introduced this language. They're not surprised by what they're going to see. So if there's a family member who poses a concern to a child placed in a home, identify how appropriate supervision is used. For safety purposes, discussions about trauma should be done in individual interviews. So again, individual interviews, I just mentioned that. That's the applicant A and B separate interviews. You may need to introduce the concept of domestic violence, behavioral definition. So it's got this link to the behavioral definition of domestic violence also. So there, more information available here, which is great. I highly recommend looking through this before you start your work with your first, in between that sort of in the migration plan, in between when, things slow down and when you start actually entering and doing your home studies in WCAP, make sure you've read through this, or at least, browse through it. You don't have to read every section in detail or intently, but, just make sure you understand where this information is. If you have questions, this is where you'll find answers to specific sections. And then here are the home study questions. So you have these tips, practice tips, and then home study questions. So for childhood trauma, you've got this practice tip here. Trauma is most easily defined as an emotional or physical reaction to an event that is witnessed or experienced that is scary, intense, and or disturbing. So here's your practice tip. It shows you the information here corresponds to the home study itself. So it was assessed that the applicant did not experience childhood trauma. And it talks about the narrative boxes. So it's going to help you figure out how to indicate your answers, give you practice tips. And then, okay, so then moving forward, we're talking about mitigation factors. So if if we decide that it was assessed that the applicant experienced childhood trauma, we're going to identify areas of the trauma. Data collected will not print. So as we mentioned before, the boxes that you select will not print on the home study. And the practice tip is if this question is selected, a box will expand for you to select the identified areas of trauma. Please select all that apply. So we're going to do that. Select all mitigation factors that apply. Your practice tip, an additional box will expand, listing mitigating factors for the above mentioned experienced trauma. Please select the mitigating factors that apply. And then you're going to be asked to describe. So this is that narrative box that will pop up if you select that they had experienced childhood trauma. Then you're going to describe that trauma. So we've seen this now. In our, in the home, in the training so far, and we'll look at the home study in a minute. But so we're just, we already know that there's a narrative box. So the practice tip, the narrative should encompass all of the areas of trauma that were identified, as well as any mitigation that was checked. This narrative should not be a list of needs to be written in essay format. So, and needs to be written in essay format. Sorry, it's not a list, but needs to be written in essay format. Here's the systemic. When you have questions about what you do with systemic or intergenerational trauma, how do you assess that? How do you interview a family to assess that, or an applicant? Assist the family in identifying systemic and or intergenerational trauma they may have experienced. How has this impacted their ability to care for children? Again, we're going to focus on how it impacts their ability to care for children and to provide child safety. When working with kinship providers, be mindful of how the child welfare system has contributed to systemic and or intergenerational trauma and how their experiences may contribute to a lack of trust with government systems. So we see what we're, how it helps us, answer the questions for this trauma section. Let's go back to, where is, okay, sorry, Venti. Okay, so let's look at another section here. We already did trauma. Let's take a look at this caregiver health and well-being section. Okay, so part one, we talked about all the different parts for all of these sections. We went through everything earlier. You'll see for part one, we're talking about medical history. This is just the physical medical history, nothing else. So we're going to indicate what type of report they filled out. If you have any questions, our guide link is right here. The applicant completed an applicant medical self-report, or if we choose a different one, we will, let's just click on it. I'll go back to this other one. Okay, so we click this. If we, this won't open up another box, narrative box, but some of them do. Some of the indicators will open up additional radio buttons to click on to indicate how you mitigated or what the mitigation is.
Addie, are you able to show them like the trauma indicating box? Sure. Just so they can get that visual of what I would click. It was assessed that the applicant experienced childhood trauma. So when she clicks that, if you can click that.
Yep. So here we are in trauma, and we indicated this before, but you can move around in the home study just by clicking on the section that you want. So, and scrolling. So we're talking about trauma. So here's the trauma section. You just click on it. And it takes a while sometimes. There we go. Okay. So part one, childhood trauma. It was assessed that the applicant did not experience childhood trauma, or say we do have childhood trauma that we've assessed during our interview process, or looking at our paperwork, because some of the paperwork does indicate this. So if you had questions on what childhood trauma is or what you're supposed to be assessing for this area, you could click on the guide link. It'll open up the document, hopefully directly to this section. Sometimes it won't, so you'll scroll through. Identify. So here, when we click on the second one, we'll get this box that of indicators. Identified areas of trauma include. And so say
I was referring to in my presentation earlier. Yep.
Yeah. So say for some reason we had maybe they experienced a natural disaster. We would click on that. We would select mitigation factors that apply. So let's see, you could choose anything here. So if you choose, if the mitigation is not present here that you feel like mitigates this area, then you can click other and talk about, it says enter details below. So you're going to talk about how they mitigated that wasn't necessarily present here in the form, the home study form. So here, let's look at part two okay, so we're going to leave this because, well, actually I'll cancel. If you've entered something and you move on without saving the information, it is going to ask, it'll pop up and do that. So I tried to move to part two without saving, and it's going to ask you, make sure that you want to actually leave this page or the site because the changes won't be saved. So because this is just a demo, it's fine, but I'm going to go back and reselect the area that I had. So, and then so then you have to scroll to the bottom, save and continue to get to the next piece without losing our information. It should always ask you before you move forward without saving something, if you want to do that or not. A lot of work in this new home study is just going to take getting used to. It's obviously different than what we've been doing for a while now. So, so the second one again was the adult trauma. We did mark that she had experienced trauma as an adult. This is what she experienced: sexual abuse and violence. Our mitigating factors that we selected were applicant has demonstrated an ability to protect, has attended counseling or therapy related, identified a support system, strengths gained from traumatic experiences, and recognizes if or when they are triggered. And then you will be asked again to describe these things: circumstances, if the applicant overcame or continues to overcome, any situations or behaviors that have triggered the trauma response, any potential trauma affected parenting. Sometimes those can be strengths, as Pam mentioned before. So say someone has experienced something, maybe they were abandoned as a child for some reason. Actually had that situation with one of the applicants that I worked with. She had immigrated to the US from a different country. So, but one of the, trauma affected parenting, potential trauma affected parenting is that she was way more focused on safety and meeting her children's needs. So that's a positive mitigation factor. It's not necessarily negative. But you are going to indicate that here, whatever it is, whatever it happens to be. Okay, domestic violence. We had chose that she had not been a perpetrator or alleged perpetrator of domestic violence. If you do select, let's see, describe who the domestic violence concerns pertaining to and how they will or will not impact the care of children. And so this section, I believe, becomes this piece now, the narrative becomes required if you select. It was assessed that the applicant has been a perpetrator or alleged perpetrator of domestic violence. And so understanding of domestic violence here down below. I'll go unmark this one. If we marked the applicant did not demonstrate an understanding, I believe that this now becomes required. Also describes concerns and mitigation if applicable. And maybe they haven't. So that would be a concern that you would discuss, and you would, also discuss later on in the home study in the assessment section. Okay, let's see. So we've gone through trauma pretty detailed. Again, we've looked at the home study guide. We've looked at the trauma piece. And sorry, I keep hitting this middle button. There's the domestic violence, caregiver health and well-being. Are there other sections that you want me to pull up and to scroll through or discuss? What are the other sections can we show you? Anybody want to put it in the chat of anything specific they were hoping to take a look at? And if not, I can go through some others. I just wanted to see if there's anything else anybody had in mind. Okay, so it looks like maybe not quite yet.
How about Addie?
Yeah.
You mind showing them the home and neighborhood section? That section kind of has weapons and the drugs and alcohol, and see how those are answered.
Well, this is a long section, so you'll see. We're going to leave because it's fine. I don't need to necessarily save what we've done. Okay, so you'll notice there are 5 sections or 5 pages here in this section, or parts, excuse me, and they are pages too. Part 1, we're describing our home. This is, just your memory of what the home is like. It's more of a basic, a summary description of the home and condition. Again, if you have questions, we can pick up the guide. We can click on the guide. I don't know why this is taking so long. And we will scroll. Let it load. Sorry. Okay, let's see if we can scroll down to. We're still. Okay, we're in development here.
Yeah, and again, everyone, when we go live, this guide should take you right directly to the section that you're supposed to be at. So
I'm going to delete my link here and see if I can pull this up again. Let's click here, see what it pulls up. Sorry.
I think it's fine though, Addie. I think we got the point though when it comes to
okay.
The guide.
It's just so much more convenient when it pulls up correctly. Okay, so let's just so this next one is we're describing the sleeping arrangements. Again, you guys have done this before. You're currently doing this. You're describing sleeping arrangements. You should be describing the home itself, the sleeping arrangements, where the foster children will sleep. And of course, we'll have to still meet the requirements for the home inspection. For this applicant, we said that there are 2-bedroom homes, a 2-bedroom home, any foster child staying in the home would sleep upstairs on the main floor with the applicant, and her child would move. You notice if a younger female child, so depending on, you know, gender and age of child placed in the home, since she has a son. Okay, Corey, I'll come to yours in your question in just a second. The younger female child is placed to, you know, maintain our compliance with the wax. She would be sleeping, the child would sleep in Jack's room, and he could sleep somewhere else, either with her in her room or in their guest bedroom in the basement. But, you know, based on the child's age, they would have to be on the same floor as the caregiver. Okay, so we do a few questions. I currently do a bullet point in this section. Does it now need to be a narrative? I do believe that we want narrative in this home study. And one of the sections we had talked about and described earlier mentioned that as well. Does that answer the question? If anybody else has any follow-up to that, Pam, do we know if bullet points are no longer acceptable in if we want actual narrative within the narrative boxes? Maybe she's off for a minute.
Yes, no, I agree.
Okay, good.
It should be consistent.
Okay. Oh, you're okay. I can tell you're clicking on a little bit. Okay. Yes. So no more bullet points. We do want narrative. Okay. So going back a section, how do we decide when the mental health form 13-001 needs to be completed, and who decides if it needs to be completed, LD or CPA? I will speak just from the assessment standpoint. Initially, you are going to, so say somebody tells you they have a specific mental health issue, they are in frequent counseling, or they take, you know, if they're taking multiple medications to treat that mental health, we're probably going to want to go and ask for follow-up from maybe their psychiatrist or, you know, psychologist, and or whoever's prescribing that medication for that condition. And so that's when we would want to use forms. I'm not sure if we have, so who decides? Anybody have any more on the CPA side or regional licensor side?
Yes. So can I go back to the home study section? So Pam, I'm looking at current home study guide, and there's a sample for that section, and actually bullet points are currently allowed according to the current home study section. So just FYI, if you actually click on, but the sample of it. So this.
Thanks, Alexa.
Yeah. So I just wanted to clarify, because I remember talking about that when I was in the work group. So yeah.
Alexa, which section are you talking about? Because I could go show.
So it's on page 62 of the home study guide, and there's a sample.
Let's just type in 62.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So scroll down right there. See? Yes.
Note that so possible example, note that your description does not have to be outlined like this example below.
So I think it can be more than one style. I think bullet points are fine, and also the narratives.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course it should be clear and provide all of the information. So if you have all of your information within your bullet points, great. So, okay, so let's see. So we're talking about mental health again. Do you have
so I think I know what the question is. I think it starts from the self-medical report, Corey, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So for us, it's CPA that needs to make the determination based on your interview, based on information you're gathering, if the medical report by the doctor or additional mental health form is needed. So you need to make the determination. Just because somebody disclosed chronic illnesses or something, that's not an automatic reason to require the one that needs to be completed by the medical doctor, unless the family wants to be recommended for adoption. So for adoption, yes, definitely. But you need to assess, meaning CPA, and then when we review if the explanation is thorough, why additional form by the provider was not necessary, that we will not be asking because the information will be sufficient and clearly noted in the home study. But if there are any additional questions, or if we deem that mitigation is still needed, we might ask for it. But ultimately, like, it starts from you, and we expect CPAs to make their determination as part of the assessment. And I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah, I guess I wonder if, like, there's a certain timeline. Say I saw a counselor 5 years ago. Do we need to follow up with that?
Yeah.
Or is it 10 years ago or 1 year?
Right.
When is that determined?
Yeah. So Corey and then Pam, you can chime in. So it's not based on the timeline. I mean, somebody could be in counseling currently, but doing well, and then home study indicates clearly about, the mental health history, then we will not necessarily need that mental health form. So it's not based on the how long ago or even currently. It's all about mitigation. Go ahead, Pam.
I feel like it's based on functionality of the person. I feel like half the world's in counseling after the pandemic right now, which could be positive to help them cope. But it's really about, how is this person functioning? I mean, have they had a recent suicide attempt? Do they not seem stable? Do they not seem able to parent? Do they have unresolved trauma issues that could impede their parenting? I mean, it's so individualized that we can't just have a cookie cutter. I mean, it's part of your professional assessment of this individual and their ability to meet a traumatized child's needs. Mm-hmm. So, I would say be cautious, but, a lot of people I think are, kind of still struggling here with the post-pandemic stuff and, are getting additional support, which doesn't mean we need additional information. It just means maybe they have a little stress or anxiety or something. I don't know. But, really look at, how does this impact their parenting? How does this impact their daily functioning? And those are the questions that you should be asking them and asking yourself as you're evaluating their ability to parent our traumatized children.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys for all of the wonderful communication and conversation around this. I do have to point our time to the clock because we only have about 14 minutes left and we still have a little bit more to get through. So we're going to continue on.
Okay, so for the sake of time, well, we certainly can look at every section, but you'll be able to do this in our 2-day trainings in person. Most of us will see each one of you in your trainings, but we wanted to make sure that you have access, or where you'll be able to find these things. It's fairly easy. We're going to be working in this demo Benti site during our trainings, so which will look just like the regular one. It's just not production material. It's the demo, and you can create your own applicants here and write, practice writing home studies. And again, we'll talk about that and logging in when we do your in-person training. But this is just, we want you to see what it looks like. We want you to see where you can grab the guide. I believe you could access the guide right now on. Is that true that they could access the guide now? Yeah, okay. And maybe we could send out that link if they want to get started and look at the home study guide and read through it before you get to this part, before you get to practicing it. But okay, let me just finish this home environment section, and then we'll move on to the next piece. So part 2 here, we clicked on page 2 or part 2. Will bring us to the second page. Each of these parts are different pages, so you interchangeably use part and page. So we're talking about weapons. Here's where it is assessed that there are no weapons or ammunition in the home or on the property. Say you've got someone who is a relative who has a kiddo in the home, and this is not a licensed home study, which is not going to be your area necessarily, but then we are marking this one. And their requirements will be based on this DCYF 10453. Or for the licensed family, maybe they do have guns and ammunition, weapons and ammunition in the home, but you are going to mark that, during your home inspection, you will be checking and making sure that they meet the WAC requirements for weapons and gun storage and safety. So, okay, so we'll go back to where we are here. Again, only include narrative significant to the assessment. So say somebody has weapons, we don't need to identify the number of guns or type of gun necessarily, but if you have, if for some reason you have somebody who was resistant to, maybe they have weapons in the home, they didn't have them locked initially, or they had them locked that wasn't according to the WAC, didn't follow the codes, then but you were able to get them to the point of, you know, getting a gun safe and storing, you know, or maybe their, you know, ammunition was stored with their guns and it wasn't in a gun safe. So you're going to describe how you got to, again, like the math problem, you're going to describe how you solved the problem, basically. So that's what you would include in your narrative section here. Toxic materials, again, you're going to answer those questions here. Include narrative, like if somebody had to clean something up or store things differently, you would put that here than what they originally had, or if there's resistance to it. Alcohol, nicotine, marijuana. If you have concerns, you're going to indicate that, and then you're going to describe narrative significant to your assessment. How you mitigated that concern. Part 3. Okay, so part 3, medication storage. So again, this is where they're gonna have to comply with the WACs. So for general foster care, of course, we're gonna be needing all medications locked, and they're gonna have to be separated between internal and external. And if they have any pet meds, they'll be stored differently. So you'll be meeting all of the WACs here, making sure, you know, indicating that they met WACs here. And all of this information will be gathered during your inspection, your licensing inspection. Pets, animals, etc. Melissa has a pet. She has a cat. Cat is friendly and playful, interacts well with her son and other children who visit the home, as well as any adults who visit the home. Okay, part 4, outbuildings. So, you know, again, nothing different from your normal assessment or normal inspection, but you're going to indicate outbuildings. There are outbuildings on the property. Some of our providers are, you know, have property, so there may be multiple buildings on the property, or someone has a detached garage. So, you know, we just indicate that we've inspected that and what, you know, describe what it was like and why you're putting information here. Potential hazards. So no potential hazards in this home, or you have potential hazards in the home or on the property that will not affect the safety of children, or it was assessed that there were potential hazards that may affect the safety of children. So this is where, you know, you're going to indicate what you found at your home inspection for hazards, and then you're going to describe the hazards if you had something that was significant. And I think it would be up to you to decide if you chose this middle one. If you put extra information here, maybe you feel like it's significant. I think you could put a sentence or two, but for sure, if this last one is selected, here's going to require that you mitigate the problem here. So potential hazards, pools, trampolines, etc. How are they mitigated, including details of supervision plans and how they may affect children. So that's what you will select for that section. Okay, so then we move to part 5. Access to services and resources. Applicants have sufficient access to necessary resources. So schools, health services, grocery stores or food in the neighborhood will be indicated here. Okay, so home environment. This is the home study again. Your guide link is available on every page of the home study. You will have at least access to the guide, and hopefully it'll pull up to the right section for you. Won't always, but hopefully it will. But it's always accessible, and this demo version as well as the live version for WCAP. So I'm going to toss it to Alicia.
Since launching WCAP in January of 2023, the majority of staff report that when they select the home study guide link within WCAP, the guide opens directly to that area. But as you guys witnessed today, Um, there are certain situations where whenever you select the guide link, it takes you directly to the first page. And so that is something that is currently being worked on. But the majority of staff have reported that they do not experience this. And actually, Addie and I were talking about this because I always get the first page. But when she's on her own computer and not trying to teach to everybody, it opens specifically to the section that she needs it to. So this is something that our WACAP team and Binti know about, and it's being worked on. Also, the other thing that we wanted to make sure that we reminded people of is that the home study guide should not be accessed in WACAP while you're out in the field interviewing families. And this is something that Carl mentioned. And I feel like Pam and Alexa have kind of pointed to it too. We don't want to be like, especially like with the trauma section, because that seriously has like the checklist. We should not be having that open, asking specifically, have you been bullied? Have you been this? It's your assessment and how you get to what kind of trauma somebody may have experienced is all in the verbal communication that you have with them, right? In forming that relationship and having those conversations. So if you do need to access the guide while in the field, please either pin a link to your internet browser, or you can download a copy to your desktop, but also keep in mind, it is being updated frequently. So if you have it on your desktop, make sure that you are updating it frequently. So we wanted to let everybody know that we wanted to provide, I guess, a sneak peek is more what I wanted to say. And so there is the home study guide is currently in the process of becoming an online document that everybody will be able to access through the DCYF portal, or not portal, I'm sorry, the DCYF website. And so what this will look like is basically as you see it now. So as Addie was showing you, by scrolling, everything will be broken up into specific sections. As you can see, like the applicant A, applicant B, it'll break down the intent, the practice tip, home study questions. So maybe let's say under household demographics, you already understand the intent, you already understand the practice tip, but maybe you would like some suggestions on maybe a home study question that you need to answer, or, you know, or not answer, but ask for your applicants. I know it came up with like trauma or like the intergenerational, where it's like, how do we get people to understand what this is? So this is a guide to say, hey, maybe, you know, prompting by using these questions or what have you. And so another thing, so it's not shown on here, but it was information that was provided to us after this is there's also like a possibility that a fourth category will be added to each of these sections that will provide example interview questions and discussions when interviewing applicants. And so this is something that is definitely in the works. Obviously, it's not yet finalized, but once it goes live, please be making sure that you look out for information on it, because it will get too easily, and just click the links or the sections that are necessary for what you're trying to get accomplished in the home study. All right, we can now move ahead. And so we are we're wrapping up today. We skipped a slide because Addie did an awesome job of showing you the home study practice guide and the home study all in one fell swoop. So we're wrapping up, and for the sake of time. So we know that this new home study process may seem overwhelming currently. And there's a lot that we're asking you to learn, and we're asking you guys to work on a new system, and sometimes that's challenging. But we want to make sure that we just encourage you guys to utilize the the process maps. Be aware again of what the migration plan looks like for your work environments, and then please make sure that as questions come up that you're utilizing your regional licensors. You can contact Binti Chat, which you guys will learn more about in the 2-day training, and you can also utilize our WACAP team. They are a wealth of information. Also, please remember, although the home study looks different, it is still a suitability assessment, right? Ultimately, you guys as CPAs and regional licensors are still responsible to assess the competence and suitability of the applicants, as well as the physical setting and for the placement of children. And so that does not change in this. And so, yeah, we just want to make sure that everybody is I guess, clear on that this is still a suitability assessment. We can move on. So we were trying to have time for questions and answers, but we've run to the end of our time. And so as we mentioned, we have documented all questions that have been asked so far, and we will make sure that we get out the Q&A document to you guys with answers to all the questions that were asked today. Finally, so our learning objectives were having an understanding of the history of the home study, becoming familiar with the sections of the home study, understanding what indicators and mitigators are, and knowing what the home study guide is, how to use it, and where to find it. And so, being able to navigate the home study within WACAP. And so before we close out, for those of you that are still with us, we have one last poll that we would like to do really quickly. And the question is just, after today's training, how comfortable do you feel using the new home study in WACAP? Again, there is no right or wrong answer. We understand we've got people of varying comfort levels. So it's A, I'm excited and ready to get started. B, I'm optimistic, but I know I still have a lot to learn. This is a lot of information. I need to get into the system and get comfortable with it or the new system. And D, I'm not ready, exclamation. So if you would just please take a minute to complete that, and then we will wrap up today. The people that were able to answer, 23% said, I'm excited and ready to get started. B, I'm optimistic, but no, I have a lot to still learn. C, 36%. This is a lot of information, and I need to get in the system and just kind of play around. And 1% said I'm not ready. So thank you guys for participating in that. And so in closing, we just wanted to thank you guys very much for your participation, all the questions. This is definitely a new training, and we appreciate you sharing this virtual space with us and engaging in this learning process. We will, as we mentioned several times, we will be sending out an email with resources and documents that have been requested today. And we will also be sending out SurveyMonkey. We greatly appreciate if you could complete that and get it back to us as soon as possible. With the SurveyMonkey, your answers are anonymous, but it will definitely provide us with information on how we can make this training better, or if you like it, how it is, etc. So with that, thank you again for joining us.